Welcome, everyone. This is our Tuesday, July 11th, regular Board of County Commissioners work session. And we're going to start with a welcome and introduction to our District Attorney, Jeff Cheney. And welcome today, and welcome to our welcoming county.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here. My name is Jefferson Cheney. That's my official name. Most people call me Jeff, and some people call me worse than that. I'm the new district attorney. Yesterday was my 6-month anniversary.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. And I just wanted to come and meet the commission and not let the first time that I meet you be asking for money, which is typically that budget cycle. So I just wanted to come up and say hi and kind of give you a paintbrush approach to where we are in the office as far as I can see, some of the trends, tell you about some of the great things that our people are doing. I'll tell you about some of my vision for the district attorney's office, and recognize that all of you represent 5 residential districts, and so I believe in representative democracy. And so I believe that hearing from you, because I know that you're hearing from your constituents, maybe some of the expectations of the district attorney's office, it's prudent for me to make myself available to you because that's a good source of information. So I'm here just to kind of give you a state of the office speech, I'll also tell you some of the good things that I'm doing and submit myself to questions.
Great.
So with those nods, I think that's a green light to kind of tell you where we are. The district attorney's office is in good shape. We have approximately 34 employees district-wide. We have 4 offices, as you know, one here in Aspen, one in Glenwood Springs, one in Rifle, and one in Meeker. We handle a pretty big judicial district land-wise, not very big population-wise. We have approximately 13 attorneys who handle a myriad of case types. Here in Pickens County, we average about 85 to 95 felonies per year. We also have about 15 to 20 juvenile cases per year, and we have about 500 misdemeanor and traffic cases per year. The total, just to give you an average, is in 2015 we handled a total of 756 cases here in Pickens County. In 2016 we handled a total of 730 cases in Pickens County, and as of right now we're up to 380 cases. So we're on course to stay about average. Numbers are not really that fluctuating at this time. Some of the good things that I think we're accomplishing in terms of bringing my philosophy to the district attorney's office, I have started a restorative justice program. I believe in restorative justice. It's a tool that should be available to victims and accused persons in our criminal justice system. And what it does, I think, is it offers the accused person the opportunity to be involved with making amends to the victim. It allows the accused person to be heard. It allows the victim to be heard together in a setting where they can communicate directly. And restorative justice can be used prior to filing criminal charges. Sometimes it's used after, even after conviction. And so I see this as a viable tool for our judicial district to save taxpayers money, to prevent people from coming into the criminal justice system if that's unnecessary. If we can repair and restore the harm to the victim, allow the offender and the accused person to rehabilitate without taking up another seat in the limited seat capacity of the criminal justice system, I want to do that. I'm excited about this program and believe that it is a way, again, for victims and accused people to communicate. If you have any experience in the criminal justice system, and I have experience both as a defense attorney and as a prosecutor, and as a defense attorney, typically my advice to my client is to be quiet. Don't say anything from start to finish. And there's a reason for that. We don't want our clients to incriminate themselves. We want them to exercise their constitutional rights. The problem, though, with some cases, and that being the standard, is that victims never actually hear. that earnest apology from the accused person. And that accused person never really gets to communicate that earnest apology to victims. And there's something healing about that, and I think that restorative justice can offer that opportunity. I'm also moving forward with our diversion program that was started by my predecessor. I think that's a good program. I'm thankful that she started that. We're going to continue utilizing that. Diversion is similar to restorative justice in that it can divert a person away from the criminal justice system to prevent them from having long-term sustainable convictions that the collateral consequences of that conviction probably last longer than it should. So diversion allows them to keep that conviction off their record by going through a series of processes that allow them to do public service, to accept responsibility, for the victim to be involved. And so diversion's alive and well, and in fact we sought a grant increase this year, and we were able to get an increase in our grant to continue to have a robust diversion program. So those are two of the really exciting things that are going on in our office. One of the things that we're dealing with, probably more so than we have in a long time, is we have some very serious homicide cases that are going on right now. We don't get those very often, but unfortunately there's been a few of those in the last year and a half, 2 years. So our office is really busy with preparing those cases for litigation. And so we're really fortunate to have good, experienced attorneys down in Glenwood Springs, and we're very fortunate for our team up here in Aspen. I'd like for you to stop by sometime and see the office. Sarah Oshakavich is our felony deputy, and she's doing an outstanding job. She's very level-headed, she's community-minded, and she is, I think, a great representative of our office here for the felony cases. We also have Denton Walker. He's our misdemeanor county court prosecutor. He comes from the state of Texas, and he dealt with a lot of serious cases there, but he's had to come here and sort of start from county court and work his way up. And then we have Laura Maylene, our face of the office, and it's a good-looking face, by the way, so if you stop by there, you'll see that. And Laura's helped me with these numbers to be prepared today, and we have Danielle Bennett, who's our victim assistant, to serve the people here in Pitkin. One of the things that I would encourage you to tell your constituents about as you're out and about interacting is I do have visiting hours here and in all of the counties every month where I've set aside time to be open to communicate with anyone about anything without an appointment. So I've had some interesting visitors in all three of the counties, but I've also appreciated those visitors. They've given me some insight about things that are going on in the community, and again, I believe in representative democracy, and so I think in order to represent people, you need to be available to communicate with them. So I'm available every month here at least. I'm obviously up here in Aspen a lot more than once a month, but that's a time that I've set aside unless I'm in trial.
Where do people find the hours for that?
We are going to post those on our website. There's a letter posted outside for the public to see on our public bulletin board, and there's a letter there that explains when I'm there and what the purpose is. Okay. And I'm having a freeze right now as to what day. I know it's this Thursday that I'll be here again, okay. Day after tomorrow, and so this Thursday is the third Thursday of every month. That's when I'm here in Pitkin.
Great, thank you for that.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. So those are some of the things that we're accomplishing. Challenges, obviously challenges are no different today than they were 12 years ago when I was the assistant DA. We have trouble hiring, and maintaining qualified, competent attorneys. Our attorneys work harder than they get paid for. And all you have to do is compare a salary of maybe an officer with the Aspen Police Department, and you can see that the officer in the Aspen Police Department makes more than our felony deputy handling felony cases here in Pitkin County. And that's a disparity that we struggle with. So that's why I sought approval from you all informally to be able to use other currency, other forms of currency like titles, expansions of responsibilities. But I got to tell you, that only goes so far. If I have an attorney that says, okay, let me get this right. You want to promote me to have more responsibility, but you're not going to pay me for it. And I get it. But at the same time, a lot see that as an opportunity. So that's our biggest challenge, in all honesty, is cost of living, being able to pay Aspen, the Aspen, being on parity with other legal professionals in this community. And I submit, and I know that I'm biased, but I don't know that there's anything more important if you're a victim of a crime than the prosecutor who's prosecuting the offender. If you've ever had a family member being victimized of a crime, or if you've ever had a family member accused of a crime, you want the top-notch professional prosecutor who knows what they're doing, who has the experience, and is not just here as a stepping stone for something more seriously. You want competence. You deserve competence. And so I realize that as the district attorney, to advocate deputy district attorneys making as much as, say, someone who works at one of the 17th Street law firms who has a satellite office here, I understand why you'd say, well, wait a minute. They're not doing that. They're not in that type of importance. And I would say, oh, yes, they are, much more so. All you have to do is ask yourself, what would you expect if you were a victim? What would you expect if you were an accused person? You would expect top-notch, professional, competent representation. And so in order to get that, we need to be willing to pay for that. So we're going to continue. I'm going to continue to be a steward of and first of all, thank you so much for your support for the office financially. Thank the community of Aspen for that. And we're going to try to be good stewards of that and stretch our dollars to pay for that competence. But that is our challenge. That's one of our biggest challenges.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I mean, it's always interesting, one of the challenges when you talk about budget is the disparity between how the ninth jurisdiction.
Judicial.
It's tough.
Works.
It is
a tough one. But anyway, so you've got Pickens County, you've got Garfield County, you have Rio Blanco County. So much difference in terms of economics.
For sure.
Probably much difference in terms of social values. Political points of views. So that is a challenge. I'm just curious, given that disparity amongst all the different counties, how you're finding working with our public safety officers, our sheriff and our chief of police.
I love working with Joe and Richard. I met with them last year before the election and just told them that if I was blessed enough to get elected, I wanted to get off on the right foot with each of their departments. And so I brought a notepad with me when I met both of those guys and said, tell me what I need to know. Tell me how I can represent Pickens County in the way that you think the people who live here deserve to be represented. And so, yes, it is a difference. And I think what you have to do is embrace those differences. You have to understand that, as a judicial district, as a multi-county judicial district, you have to recognize each county has its own personality. And I've been blessed to have been a prosecutor here in the 9th JD. That's a trick. We don't have to pronounce that. Judicial District JD. I've been blessed to be a prosecutor here for over 12 years before I was elected. So I've done a jury trial in Rangeley one day, and then I've done the docket in Aspen the next. And it's quite a difference, but it's a blessing. It's a gift to be able to recognize that communities have different expectations, and while the law is the law, we also need to make sure that we're listening to the people and what their expectations are with regard to how aggressive we should be, how passive we should be. And honestly, my philosophy to our team from day one, obviously that day one was a day that I prepared for. That day after I took my oath, I prepared my remarks to our team, and I said, look, I want us to focus on people who are hurting people. In other words, people who are assaulting and committing sexual assaults and obviously the homicides. The rule breakers, we need to try to look at how can we help people who genuinely, earnestly want to rehabilitate. What other tools can we use, like diversion, like restorative justice? And that's the reason why those tools are so effective in dealing with the differences between the counties So I embrace it, I've enjoyed it, and I've appreciated the professionalism of Chief Pryor. He's been open and communicative to me from day one. So has Joe DeSalvo. Sheriff DeSalvo has been open and communicative to me from day one. And I think either one of those professionals wouldn't hesitate to call my cell phone at the drop of a hat if they felt that I was off the mark. And that's what I've asked for, is to let me know when I'm out of bounds, when I'm getting out of the lane that they think I should be in.
All right, we have just a few minutes here before we move on, Rachel.
Yeah, I know we're aware of the funding mechanisms between the three counties, and that's not really your office's doing per se, other than budget requests. But in the past, it's felt that we have less cases than some of the others, and then an equal split makes it a little awkward, but that is something that would have to be worked out county to county. What I was going to bring up is the point, and it's not as if we're seeing any issues or challenges with it now, but in the past, with other prosecutors, other district attorneys, there's been a perception of overcharging defendants in order to say, hey, just bail now, make a settlement, because you have all these charges. And
sure.
I think that's somewhat inappropriate. It's a little bit of a heavy hammer sometimes. And what is your broader philosophy on charging versus overcharging, or certainly not undercharging?
I agree with you, Rachel. I think it is inappropriate to overcharge and to use charging as a mechanism to achieve some sort of bargain or agreement later. I had a senior prosecutor to me one time ask me, when I had given an opinion on how to charge a case, what are your bargaining chips? And frankly, I looked back at him and said, this is not poker. We're not playing Texas Hold'em. We're dealing with people's lives. And so we need to make charging decisions based on the evidence and the law, and not based upon trying to leverage or squeeze someone to plead guilty to something perhaps they didn't do. I mean, I have obviously experience with people. I've represented people who've been incarcerated and who've come to me and said, I'm convinced that the person who I shared the cell with was innocent. And I said, well, tell me how. And they explained to me the process and how that person felt coerced, really, by the system and by the charging decisions to plead guilty to something that they perhaps did not do. And I think that's inappropriate. So I agree with you, and I have committed to people that I've talked with to make charging decisions based upon evidence. I've already made decisions in this term, in the first 6 months, to not charge something that I charged 5 years ago or 6 years ago when I was in the district attorney's office, based strictly on maturing, getting a little older, and having, I think, a more weathered experience by life, and just understanding that we're not playing poker with people's lives. And so that's the discussion I had, and I stand by that today.
Thank you for that. That's a great answer.
Well, we look forward to you having further discussions with you, certainly this fall when it comes time for budget, but continue to have this dialogue. You're welcome to come up anytime and keep us updated in terms of what's happening and how we're all doing.
I really appreciate the opportunity. I'll try not to filibuster the next time I come up. I'm just really thankful to be the district attorney, and everywhere I go, that's what I say. The first thing I say is I'm very thankful for the job, for the opportunity to serve, and if and when I get off the mark, I invite you to let me know. No matter how you let me know, I'm open to input, feedback, and let your constituents know that I'd love to visit with them with or without an appointment on those visiting days.
Thank you very much.
Coming up.
Thank you.
And I hope you heal quickly.
Thank you.
And I'll keep swinging by the office when I'm down there.
I hope so. I enjoy seeing you.
That was
always.
great.
Yeah, thank
Nice
you
to
so
see you
much.
again.
Yeah, I think my wife hopes that I heal too, because I've been using this as an excuse.
How's the motorcycle?
It's in bad shape. I don't think it's street legal right now.
That's a good thing.
That is. That's right. She's like, that's a good thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Be careful out
Say
there.
hi to Tony Hershey for me.
I will. I will. Thank you.
All right, let's see. Next on the agenda is a draft climate action plan. This is pretty exciting. A lot of work, long time in coming, but I think we're moving in the right direction. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm Cindy Hubin, the Community Development Director, Ellen Sassano, our long-range planner, and we have a lot of people represented in the audience from the various departments that are part of the Climate Action Plan. I just wanted to acknowledge everyone who's here and thank everybody for coming and working on the plan and pulling this together for the board. Today, I think the emphasis is just that we as Pitkin County have looked at and acknowledged the greenhouse gas inventory that was done for Pitkin County as a whole, that Core and Sarah has helped us with, and also Chris from the city of Aspen that we've been working closely with have helped us with. So we've acknowledged now that we have a baseline to work from. And the idea with the greenhouse gas emissions study is that that will be updated every 3 years. So as an organization, we are trying to be consistent and have our own climate action plan that responds to what the board would like to see relative to addressing greenhouse gases in the various sectors. So just so you know, there's a couple. Our background with the greenhouse gas emissions is that a large degree of the greenhouse gases come from our built environment, 70%. We have about 25% in the transportation sector and about 5% in our solid waste sector. What we're attempting to do today is look at the Pitkin County organization's climate action planning towards impacts with the greenhouse gas emissions. The second phase is to reduce greenhouse gases for the county as a whole and with external transportation partners, municipalities, and the county and adjacent counties and cities. But that will not really occur until a little bit down the road. Core is looking at whether or not they could be the facilitators of that region-wide climate action plan for us. So we'll bring that back to you. I think Core meets on July 20th and I think it's on their agenda to have a little bit of the discussion about having Core staff facilitate that larger project. Snowmass has a sustainability plan. SALT has a climate action plan. The City of Aspen is working on their climate action plan, has done a lot of work on that. And so how do we pull everyone together and work on this issue regionally? And that'll be the question. And is Core the proper agency to facilitate that? So we're hoping it moves in that direction pretty quickly. When we're talking about what we've done with our plan that you have in your packet, we have a couple questions for you. Basically, is the fundamental approach that we're taking addressing the emissions reduction with Pitkin County as an organization engaging on a broader regional level approach appropriate? And any actions within within our work program, do you feel like we've hit the problem areas that you'd like to see us address? As I mentioned earlier, the departments that are in the room, in addition to the airport, which unfortunately could not have a representative here today, have all worked to look at work plans that relate to the greenhouse gas emissions and climate action goals. So we just wanted to show that, obviously in solid waste, the landfill has a lot to do, the heavy lifting to do with how we address those issues. We put ComDev as another partner in that, or cooperating department, because we're looking at the debris generated from construction and the building permits that we have in the county, and how do we address the demolition and debris in construction, and how do we collaborate with that with Public Works and the landfill. So we've put both departments under solid waste. Same with building. goes the reverse with ComDev, landfill, and facilities. When we look at building our new facilities, how are we doing? When we're looking at maintaining our facilities, how are we doing? Transportation, obviously, we work public works, airport, and once again, community development in the planning phases of transportation issues. With that, like I said, this is a plan that is meant to be succinct. We didn't want a plan that was just going to sit on the shelf, so we jumped straight to kind of our work plans and our action item plans that we believe are doable, that we believe are fundable, and that we believe the board would be supportive of moving forward with. So each one of the departments has put together their climate action plan basically from 2017 to 2020 and taken a look at the action items. I don't know how specific you want to get into all the action items, and unfortunately, because the airport can't be here today, I'm not going to be able to address some of the technical questions you might have, but we can relay them if you'd like to. And George, would you like us to go through each one of these separately now?
Well, I was just going to suggest, just given time, perhaps just give an example from each department as an example. And then there are questions from the board,
Yeah, okay.
about
Well,
time.
from the airport, specifically, we're going to be replacing, or there's consideration of replacing the terminal. So how is that terminal built? How do we use that as an example of green construction that we can be proud of in the community relative to the greenhouse gas emissions? So that's looking ahead, planning ahead, really working with all of the latest, greatest materials and energy conservation methods that we have. So that's one example for the airport. The landfill, I actually prefer that everybody, give their best example that you'd like to. So
that'd be
Kathy,
great.
and then Brian, and anyone else who wants to come up, that'd be great.
All right, hi, Kathy Hall, Solid Waste Manager. So we worked with ComDev. As you know, probably the Solid Waste Center, everything we do is about diversion and creating less waste, which in turn helps the greenhouse gas emissions. So a couple of the things we have planned that I think will benefit greatly, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Expanding the compost area is one of them. Keeping organics out of the landfill reduces methane gas generation. Methane is 21 to 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide, so it's a big factor in getting organics out, our compost program. Another one, which we're sort of in the middle of doing right now, is the stormwater leachate mitigation project. We've recently completed liner on the side slopes of the landfill, keep rainwater and stormwater out. Again, less moisture in the landfill reduces greenhouse gas creation, methane generation within the landfill, so we're hoping that'll help considerably. And then as well as we've got a waste diversion plan near finalizing, so we'll be bringing forward to you in a few weeks some of the waste diversion goals that the consultants will be recommending that we can set for the county. So those are our big projects right now that I think will benefit this plan significantly.
Great, thanks, Kathy.
All right, I guess.
George, let me ask, at what point, as people come up and leave, will we discuss the things they're putting forward?
We could do that while they're here, or we could just do the overview and then have anyone have specific questions, we can bring them back.
Okay, well, I can hold it till we bring it back, but
Yeah, I was just sort of conscious of time. I just want to make
Okay.
sure we sort of
No
get
problem.
through the presentations.
Okay.
Also, the building department, which is under community development, I'll take a stab at that. I think you've just seen us so much recently with the energy code, the update to the recent energy code to the 2015. Also, the REMP, Renewable Energy Mitigation Program rewrite, and how that's working along with our addendum to the energy code, which is our local addendum. All of those are really significant and affect not only Pitkin County, but do affect the entire, internally, but in fact, the entire county. So I think that's where you'll see in community development, the building department, as well as the next item, which is the planning and zoning department. The codes are our key to formalizing some of our policies throughout the county. So I think that obviously you know all about the energy codes that we're working on. We, with CORE, have been working obviously on the greenhouse gas emissions inventory and will do the update with CORE when that time occurs. This should say County Climate Action Plan. Our department, Community Development Planning, has decided that we'll be the central focus for all the departments to help internally with the plan, just the coordination and facilitation. And then we have land use code improvements that we hope to make coming up in this next year with some code amendments for our land use, and one of those is siting improvements so that in fact our structures, the built environment part of the greenhouse gas emissions inventory will be addressed more specifically. We also have environmental health. I think he left.
Right here. Where'd he go?
He had a doctor's appointment,
Oh,
I think. I saw
okay.
him on his way out.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll take a shot at that. Kurt, the Environmental Health Department is within Community Development for a couple more months. And Kurt's been working on the gray water regulations as well as updates to our on-site wastewater treatment system and stakeholders groups within the state. A lot of greenhouse gas emissions health-related issues, public health-related issues, are important that we integrate these into our planning and understand that greenhouse gas emissions are so much a part of our public health in Pickens County. So without getting into specifics there and knowing exactly what his programs entail, I'll move on and then I'll turn it over to Public Works to discuss some of your actions.
Thank you. I'm Brian Pettit, Public Works Director for the county. We've been working on photovoltaic installation. In fact, if you go back to the beginning of the presentation, this is about halfway through the installation of PV on the Public Works facility. All the panels have been installed to date. They've hooked up the electrical, and we're hoping in the next 2 weeks to flip the switch. So we're auditing the output now, and this will be completed by the end of the month.
That's
So
exciting.
it is exciting. This will create more energy than the Public Works facility takes to operate on an annual basis. We're looking at the landfill for PV installations, and if there are new facilities constructed at the landfill, to make sure that they can hold the panels appropriately and generate the electricity needed. The other thing that's actually not in this packet, and we'll make sure it makes it final, is our fleet department is taking action to make sure that we have EV around the county and available to the public to plug in electric vehicles, and we continue to convert our current petroleum-driven vehicles to electricity. So you'll see that in the fleet capital replacement plan coming for 2018 budget as we continue to make that conversion. Sorry.
Thanks, Brian.
All right.
Right. And then lastly, we wanted to address the climate change commitments throughout the valley, and where we right now, Pickens County doesn't have a current target goal or commitment in terms of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So we wanted to bring this up to the board and show you where other communities are with their commitments towards greenhouse gas emissions. And then with that, we have, in the very end, some options. And that's, for the board, I want to point out that it's an interesting issue here because The greenhouse gas inventory is for the entire county. It's not just Pitkin County. So when you're making a goal statement here, this is a county-wide goal statement to be consistent with our greenhouse gas inventory. And I would say that our climate action plan internally should try to track it and be consistent with our measurement of how we're doing. But the inventory is based on the entire county. It's not just Pitkin County's organization. So I just wanted to make that clear, that this is an overall target goal for the county, not just the organization.
So this would base Ellen Sassano, long-range planner. So this goal really will apply to phase 2 of implementation of this climate action approach when we're looking at the entire county rather than just at the organization itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but do we as an organization actually have some goals set through this climate action plan and overall, or does each department have sort of their own goals?
We have a work plan which sets the goals, which will help us understand where we are as an organization towards meeting goals, but we have not set a specific numerical target goal. Because we want to be apples to apples, we don't really have how much Pitkin County as an organization generates
Right, but
greenhouse gas emissions.
But since we have this
target.
baseline now from our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, it seems like that we would have a better idea in terms of a county-wide goal once we determine how we're doing within the organization.
Number 3 there.
Yeah, which is number 3.
Right, yeah. Rachel?
Yeah, it's interesting because I know you don't want to hit a goal and then fall short and not make it. And that tends to lead people to set too low a goal and then they accomplish it. But for me, I'm sitting here thinking that if you don't set a goal, an original baseline, as it were, which perhaps is what did Public Works used to emit or generate prior to the installation of the solar panel, you're not going to end up getting credit for all the things you do. You know, so you kind of have to start measuring at some point. I've been dieting, and so do I count it from my highest point or somewhere where I should have been starting or lower than that kind of analogy? But so I do think we should set a goal. I don't accept that third bullet point. And I think kind of George has been alluding to it, but I think we should be able to have at least some way to break out some of our individual facilities, you know, so that we can track ourselves. We know with the commissioning of the new administrative building and the rebuilding of the old administrative building, we are anticipating seeing some significant energy use reductions. And so Public Works, we'll see what we get there. You know, I think we should set both a community-wide goal and our own goal to match and try to see what we can do to balance the two. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I'm saying. And you know, Governor Hickenlooper had an announcement just today at 10 o'clock at Red Rocks that they are going to join the We're Still In climate. We're going to still agree to and try to reach the climate accord of Paris goals. So I don't know enough about it to know, do our goals as a community then play into our statewide achievement and our statewide goals? Is it worth looking at that as something to consider adopting as well? I think they have, you know, X amount of reduction from the energy, electric sector, X amount from other sectors. But, you know, clearly some of these things when you look at how much of a existing built environment we have, we can't force remodels, we can't force those sort of things. But there will be improvement over time when people demolish and rebuild or remodel, and that's through the energy code. But for me, those are the things we have to track. How much reduction did we get from the new energy code passing? Things like that. So I'm kind of feeling like we should probably mirror something like the Eagle County or the City of Aspen goals. You know, the one thing that strikes me is that 2020 is a little too soon. It's practically 2018 already. I would think maybe something by 2025 makes sense. That gives you a 7-year runway before you start redoing the emissions inventory and seeing where you are. I don't know if there's a little bit of a way to do a check-in midpoint, so, you know, if it doesn't wait until the last, 6 months to say, boy, we have a huge deficit to make up. But I think 2020 is just too soon for having not set a goal. And it strikes me that, I'm not sure, but back when Dorothea was on the board, we may have signed something or joined some climate actions that may have had some targets in there or not. And so I don't know if we're on track for those at all or that anything happened there. But I did think we had some goals that were set forward back when Dylan was energy manager.
Do you remember the day? In 2008, you did have 20% by 2020 goal, but we didn't have a baseline inventory to measure. So that was kind of one of our issues. So now we have the baseline inventory to measure. And as far as, Rachel, some of your comments about, integrating with the state goals and all of that, I'm just wondering if maybe Chris or Sarah have a little bit more to say about that.
Geez. Well, in terms of the state goals, the ones that Hick and Looper had an executive order on today, they really align with what the Clean Power Plan laid out. So that's to reduce emissions 25% below 2004 levels by 2025, economy-wide. And then he wanted to reduce electricity emissions 30% by 2030. Typically, the local government commitments are a little bit more robust. And, it's generally, in part, there's two pieces. One is to just send a signal. These goals, kind of all the 80% goals, are really aligned with what the science says we need to do to have a livable planet. And they're very, they're partly aspirational, but they are something to aggressively work towards. We've done some modeling at City of Aspen to see, how achievable is this. And through our community-wide climate action planning effort that we've been hosting over the past year, we've seen that with what we know now and ideas that a 40-person advisory committee made up of community experts have brought to us, we could probably reduce emissions 71% by 2050. This is if we did everything under the sun, 250 things that this big advisory committee threw at us. And, that's promising because all we know for sure right now is that we don't know exactly what all of the opportunities will be in the future, but that if we position ourselves well to take advantage of them right now, we can, better leverage things that are coming along. So we've kind of liked the more aggressive reduction targets than what we see at the state level, both for that external storytelling component, and also, it kind of really holds our feet to the fire. And then I also want to say, organizationally, we have an entity-specific target for the City of Aspen, which is the same as the community-wide target, and we do tracking on both levels. So we do a City of Aspen, just as an organization, inventory every year. It's very straightforward. We have organizational performance goals that are linked to hitting certain targets that are incremental. And then we have our community-wide goals. Same goals, we do an inventory every 3 years because seeing the results of some of the actions take a little longer to play out. And what we've seen, over the past 10 years is that organizationally, we've been able to get pretty far, actually reduce our organizational emissions 40%. Community-wide, it's only been 7%, and that's with 10 years of, pretty deliberate and big action that you all have seen and been a huge part of, like transit, RAFTA, getting Aspen Electric to much higher levels of renewable energy. So we've thought that having both, 2 layers of targets has served us well.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering if the goal to the objectives to get to these goals is to decrease our use of fossil fuels, increase our use of renewables. It seems like it would help. You mentioned earlier, Chris, that if we had the goals of our utilities, so Holy Cross, what are their goals, Excel, and then we'd have perhaps that should correspond with some of these numbers as well.
Yeah.
Sure, I do think, I know the utilities have targets. I believe Holy Cross's current target is to hit 30% renewables, and they've already, I think that was originally supposed to be 2030, and they've already hit that. So coming up, one of the opportunities is going to be working with their board and their new leadership to potentially reevaluate and become more aggressive on that. I think one of the great things about so many of these entities that are in the Holy Cross service area working on this is that, there are dialogues happening about collectively working with Holy Cross throughout the service area to bring them further along. But the assumption, to really drive deep reductions, obviously energy supply is one of the largest drivers. And Holy Cross is the largest electricity supplier in the area.
Yeah.
I think luckily, they have great leadership, a great board, and are, well positioned to work with the communities right now.
Rachel?
Well, I was just going to say, I could see a goal of like 30% by 2025. Kind of puts us in the range of others, see how far you can get there. And then something more like 75% by 2050 if the city kind of looked at everything and thought they could get to 71%. I do believe, your grasps should exceed your reach, and you should try for a little higher target. But 80% seems a little unrealistic, and I don't want to just put them out there unrealistically, but that's just a small change, and I could see having goals like that.
So, Steve?
I'm curious if you subtract in the greenhouse gas inventory study, if you subtract the locally produced energy sources from the total emissions. For instance, City of Aspen produces a bunch of electricity at Rudai. Is that subtracted from the whole total to count towards your achieving your goals?
Well, the way that works behind the scenes in the emissions calculation is that Rudai becomes one element of the total power mix, and Rudai happens to be carbon-free. So, to calculate emissions, it's basically your consumption times your kilowatt hours times the carbon intensity of the energy you're buying. So Rudai and carbon-free sources bring that down significantly. So it's reflected in the sum, but it is not subtracted, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
And local sources are not differentiated from utility scale sources that are bought through power purchase agreements that are in other areas. It's the electricity or energy that's purchased in the given area, wherever it's coming from.
So in a sense, Aspen could be net zero if you produced so much extra renewable energy and you could sell it to other people. So you would be net zero, but you would still be having a lot of carbon emissions from from automobiles and buses and heating buildings and that sort of thing.
Correct. If we produced a lot of energy locally and purchased it, we would kind of get the credit for that renewable energy. If we sold it out of the community, then they would get the credit for that. But yes, if we really kind of decarbonize the electricity supply, that would make a huge dent in the overall picture. But all of the other elements are still important contributors.
Any questions or any additions that we may want to look at with the organizational's action plan via all the different departments? Steve?
Well, one department that was not included was the BOCC. And I made a list of 4 different things that could be, we could participate in this, maybe not in reducing the energy in a building or something. We'll let facilities or someone take credit for that, but we can do things like continue working with CC4CA is one I put on there. So in other words, working towards legislative fixes to things on a bigger scale than just locally. We could participate on a national level in different efforts that are underway nationally. We could adopt a Paris Climate Agreement goals such as Boulder County just did. We could move towards more local production of electricity and heating sources. Things like that. So big picture goals that we could adopt as a BOCC as our way of contributing to the whole effort.
No, I think that's wonderful. The way I see that happening is through your departments and your direction. So you have done that. You've put solar on the Public Works building. You've purchased solar in Rifle. You're continuing to explore solar in the community and many other actions. You're members of CC4CA. So maybe we forgot some of those actions to put CC4CA. We could put that in community development because we're also working alongside you with that. But the way I see it is this is your action plan and your direction to get those actions done through your departments. If we want a separate BOCC work plan, we could add that in here as well. But I think that's a good point, and we should look at that and maybe in this draft beef it up a little bit in the introduction to talk about our national and regional approach and influence in other ways. Perhaps that's a way to give it a little bit of credit that we are working on those things as well. Mm-hmm. But that would be my response to that.
I have some other points on the individual pages, and some of them I realized that these goals were for 2017 through 2020. So some other things maybe were put into a parking lot for future consideration at this point. One would be the wastewater treatment facility at the landfill, which would save a lot of diesel fuel to have the private haulers hauling the septic waste down to Rifle or further away. We could have the airport continuing investigating green biofuels for aviation fuel as an example. And I know they're probably keeping taking the pulse on that, but they're not actively working on it because it's not the right time to do that before 2020.
Yeah, we didn't get super aggressive in this first draft because we felt that we wanted to work our way into your budget and we wanted to also work our way into our capacity within each department to handle additional projects. While we understand that the overall climate action is important to the board, as an organization we have to absorb it in a way that is doable so that it will actually happen. So it was a light approach. We didn't get the 250 something action items that the community action group has with the city of Aspen, with the community action plan. We did start light, but it doesn't mean that we can't have another attached section with noting all the things that are possible and are probable in the next couple years. We only wanted to commit, though, to the things that we think are going to happen by 2020.
Mm-hmm. So maybe doing in a section just
An appendix.
things that we need to do by 2050 to reach that goal. We have to dig a lot deeper, do more geothermal heating, or whatever things the sort of the dream list for the big things to do down the road when it's technologically feasible and when we have the money to pursue it, that sort of thing.
To follow up on Cindy's point, I wanted to add that, these kind of 250 strategies and actions that we've compiled with this 40-person community-wide work group, which Steve, you participated in, as have Cindy and Ellen, and a number of other leaders from both of our organizations and throughout the community. We are actually going to produce what we're calling a greenhouse gas reduction toolkit with that information. It's going to inform our climate action plan, but by working with CORE, we're also going to make that available to other communities, both throughout the valley and throughout the state. We think it'll be especially relevant for this valley because we kind of figure, hey, we convened all these folks. They kind of represent, relatively broad geographic area in the Roaring Fork Valley. No need for them to come back together for a second year and go through all of the same ideas. So why not, just provide this as a resource to everybody. So that will be made available to the county and to the other local governments. And it's one thing that's great is that it'll kind of identify some of these areas that require some joint collaboration intergovernmentally, such as just our shared sectors, transportation, for example. And then I also wanted to note, on CC4CA, I think that's a great recommendation, and a lot of the things that Pitkin counties and the other government's participation in CC4CA will probably will set up through state policy, enable a lot of the things that we'll see in the local climate action plans, electric vehicle readiness and transportation, for example. CC4CA is working on state efforts to, get much more EV capacity from the Front Range out here, and that will, help break down barriers that we couldn't overcome locally, but that fit into local goals. So I think there is a lot of alignment there with the state policy work.
Rachel?
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, Steve. That's a really good point. And I think any of our work is obviously going to be integrated between the county as a business, as an organization, the community as a whole, the land use codes, energy codes, building codes, and naturally with CORE, So, a couple of the things I've been thinking of and, just to be evaluated as their feasibility and, bang for the buck and things like that. But the Tesla roof tiles, the electric roof tiles, those would be really neat to see if they would work for an installation if we're rebuilding a building at the landfill, and see how well they work at our altitude and our temperatures. I mean, I don't want to be on the bleeding edge of technology, as they say, but I'd like to see what we could do to implement either that or through CORE offering just a homeowner a significant subsidy towards if you'd like to try the Tesla roof tiles and start to prove that they could work in our community. But again, maybe it's a county building that needs re-roofing that we could work with. And the other thing is, this is weird because I mentioned to Kathy a little at our employee picnic. I've started doing the composting program, but the question is, well, where do you get the little bags that compost as well to put in your little compost container? And the answer is well, you can probably buy them on Amazon. Well, I'm not on Amazon, and I bet a lot of people aren't on Amazon, but that is not readily available. And then you say, well, I don't want to dump the coffee grounds because I'm going to have to go clean this thing just for one thing, like 2 tablespoons of coffee grounds. But, what are the things that make the composting program more adapted by the citizens and easier to use and more readily available? I'm not saying that the county should have a store, but it'd be great if we had an outlet where people could buy those things in town or at the landfill or just make them more readily available for people to compost. I mean, so part of it to me is really, obviously there's steps beneath each one of these, but how do you make them more commonplace, more standard procedure, and easier for people to use and take advantage of? And so that's just one example.
A quick follow-up. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. I'm missing the airport people because that's such an important component, and I'm hoping we get a chance to hear from them down the road and soon on this. I had some questions about airport, but we can save those. Since Kathy's here, I would love to ask a couple quick questions on what's our potential for C&D reduction and for composting. I get the impression that that's a profit center at the Waste Center, and we should be tooting our horn about that. But I'm just wondering, what's the potential for increasing our composting? And before I finish that with Rachel, I did find some plastic bags, probably on Amazon or something, but I'm not sure they work. I'm not sure it's
They
a plastic
actually
bag.
compost,
It
yeah.
says they're compostable, but they might not work in some systems, and I wanted to find out, is it okay to use this bag?
Yeah. Can I use a
so-
paper bag with my
Right.
compost? Is that okay?
Would make it much
just all
easier.
these questions.
Anyway, we can figure that one out at some point. But regarding the potential for increasing our effectiveness with composting at the dump, I'd like to hear about that.
Oh, it's
See, it slipped out.
the dollar for the margarita fund.
The D word.
Composting, increasing that potential is very high. In 2006, we expanded and redid the compost pad, got it properly permitted through the state. It was permitted to a certain area. At the time, they did not build out to that certain area. So you have to construct a compost pad. So we're looking at probably late this year, next year, increasing out to that permitted capacity for the compost pad. So that's an easy one to take on. With budget season rolling around, my plan is to put more robust composting services, buying more of the buckets, the bear-proof bins, perhaps starting what's called a compost club that forms in with part of our scraps program. That's the food waste collection program. So making it easier for citizens and providing more services, more resources.
To follow up on that real quick, if I can, we're using the compost program. We love it. So far for our neighborhood, the bin we have is appropriate size. It's not too small or too big. I noticed that the recycling bin, which is a dumpster-sized bin, fills to overflowing. And I confess, one day I didn't have time to figure out what to do with it, and I put my recyclables in the trash can, and I feel guilty about it. But I'm sure a lot of people do. And so I'm wondering, how do we have a good feedback loop with the community to know whether we've got the right size dispensers in the right places? And, is that working? Is that system working?
And that's a private hauler. And as you are aware, we are getting ready to update our waste ordinance, waste and recycling ordinance. So that is some of the things we can address to make sure haulers are sizing bins appropriately and the cost structure is appropriate.
Right. Well, thank you. I keep going. I love hearing about this stuff.
Me too.
John?
Yeah, George, if I could make a suggestion, because we had on the table the goal setting, and it kind of went from, no, that's okay. It went from a big picture goal setting to now we're talking about individual projects and how to get there. And maybe one option for the board to consider in terms of to kick back to staff would be there has been some discussion. I believe the board actually signed on to a letter supporting the Paris Climate Accords, that we would continue to support the goals that were originally established there. And within those goals, it was a temperature goal, but associated with the temperature goal is a range of carbon emissions reductions that you would have to achieve over a period of time to meet that goal. Now, these are models, and so they're within ranges, but I think if we went in the middle, took some of that modeling that was done, that overall, what kind of carbon reductions you have to have, and how do you convert those into percentages of reduction over time, that maybe you have staff do that exercise, and we convert that then into both an organizational and county-wide goal. And then we have some consistency. We have a stake in the ground because we keep signing on to goals, but they tend to be different. And so that may be an exercise that gets us back to the broader goal. To Rachel's point, is it possible? We don't know yet, but it is a tangible goal that I think has broad agreement that a number of entities internationally, nationally, locally are working towards. And then we can start to really flesh out how these individual discrete projects might contribute to that goal. Are they feasible for us? When are they feasible for us? Because it's really hard for us to figure it out here. But I think if you give us the big picture, if we kind of establish that big picture, we can start to relate back to you as a body during our budget discussions, when we have project opportunities, that, hey, we think this helps move the needle, and helps us contribute to this larger national and international discussion. So just to bring it back, because it's really difficult for us to, I think, set those goals, but we may be able to set a tiered set of goals over a 50-year period that we're going to try and hit percentages based on that.
I was just looking at this press release from the governor's announcement today in terms of continue to align Colorado with the 2015 Paris Agreement, and he talks about including a worldwide goal of limiting temperature increases to no more than 2 degrees Celsius and ideally 1.5 degrees Celsius. But in addition, he goes on and saying, as part of this, the U.S. set a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to between 26 and 28% below the 2005 levels by 2025. So we've sort of have talked about that. I mean, one of Rachel's suggestions was to move that goal from 2020 to 2025. Looking at a 30%, which puts us a little above the country, which is fine. We're usually a little ahead of the country anyway. And then perhaps we can sort of play around with that longer-term mid-century goal of what that would look like.
Yeah, and do you mind if I try and project something? This is kind of the type of data I think we could look at. If this will work, I forgot my little...
Combining the new and the old technology.
Yeah, I know.
I know. Oh, that's definitely not going to work, is it?
Can you make it bigger?
Well, it might.
With the angle.
There you go.
That's pretty good.
Well done.
This is at an odd angle. I apologize. And I'm not saying this would be the data set. I think we need to choose it. But I think there are data sets out there. This is tied to that Paris Climate Report. So it's within this range that you'd be seeking to have the carbon emissions reduced to. We could set an anchor year and set what is kind of towards the middle, a target percentage reduction, on 5-year increments, because it should change over time. And so that would be what I'm talking about, George. So similar to what they just chose one of the particular years, and what I'm saying is let's go ahead and choose some increments out to 2050 or such and start to talk about setting those goals in a tiered way, and we can adjust them in the future if we need to. And that gives us something tangible to shoot for, and it gives us something tangible to talk to you guys about when we're recommending investments.
So what you just said was we could take a graph-like model like that and then tweak the information we put into it.
And yeah, so what you do is you tell us, yes, the Paris Climate Accords are where it's at. We take the modeling that says what is the carbon reductions it takes to get there over a period of time, and we establish that as our goal, both as an organization and for our community.
Then it's not just 2025, 2050. It's this is where we're going. These are the directions.
Yeah, we have a continuum to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I think it'd be valuable to look at that. I think we would probably want to adapt it to our particular environment, which is sort of a microcosm of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think we could do that, make that adaptable with the help of our expert resources here from the city and from CORE. And with the utilities, I mean, we need to have the utilities play into this as part of the as part of that modeling.
Well, I'm really glad Chris stepped up to the plate here because he's the expert on the measurement.
Yeah, this is great, John. I'm really glad you pointed that out because, essentially that is the best practice in this type of planning work that local governments, states, and private sector companies around the country are doing. We've done this for our climate action planning process. And yeah, it's essentially forecasting emissions out to your target date, seeing what the gap is between where you'll likely end up and where you'll want to end up, and then going through a planning exercise that identifies how far along do each of these pieces move the needle, and bring down the curve from forecast to where you want to be.
Yeah.
I would be happy to share with the board kind of the results of our modeling exercise, which were kind of done using some national best practices and an Aspen-specific context at some point if you're interested in seeing what that looks like and whether it would be something valuable for Pitkin County. It did take, I would say considerable staff capacity to do the exercise, but I think, it was valuable for our process. And it originally came out of some of our council members wondering, are our targets achievable, as well as big players like Holy Cross asking how much of this are we responsible for. So we did the modeling to say, this is what's achievable in each sector and how much each one needs to contribute to get there. We're not, putting information that's that specific in the plan. We're not saying, hey, sector X, you need to do this, but we are identifying what the actual potential would be and then how all of those add up to create a total opportunity.
And as I think as noted in the memo, for us to really be most effective as a county, we need to hopefully have a similar model, similar baseline information and methodology amongst our municipalities as well. I mean, one can't be way out here and the other over here if we wanted to try to reach a common goal. So having that information from the city, what Snowmass is doing, letting them know what we're looking at, making this sort of a much more integrated overall climate action plan for the county needs those partnerships and collaboration.
Well, Georgiana, on that note, I think what George said is absolutely right, looking at what the other municipalities are doing within our county, but that to me then opens up the door for the county to take that information and put it into a graph-like structure, because you've got one here, you got one target here, 1 year, 1 here, and so it's the overreaching umbrella for those municipalities and their goals. It makes sense for us to have this better tracking maybe mechanism of what we're all doing and where we're all going to reach at the end of the day. I think that makes the perfect scenario.
Yeah, we're really happy that CORE, CORE's done the background with the greenhouse gas inventory work for us, so we're all on the same page there.
Right.
And then starting with that as our baseline, we do want to work, hopefully with CORE's facilitating the approach, but working with the same methodology for measurement.
Right.
And
We'd have to.
descriptors of where we are. And I think we might, as an organization, have some homework to do now after listening to where you want to be. I think we've presented sort of the Volkswagen engine, and I think you want the Tesla. But we're going to have to come back and work a little bit on reconciling some of those things in a context, like I say, that's doable for us to get started, because we don't want to overwhelm the departments from our primary functions right now. However, we know this is a huge goal of yours. So.
Go ahead.
Just real quick, I also think, the sell really is with the community. When the first the first, measurements, where people were like, how can you figure that out? How did you know that? Are you guessing at this? And how can you really say 80% by 2050? And so I think we need to have a community buy-in to this, because it's not going to just be us. It's everybody else that needs to pitch in if we're really going to make a difference here. And I like your analogy between the Volkswagen, but I'd pick the Karma engine over the Tesla engine any day.
Duly noted.
And so, as you said, not to overwhelm staff and all the individual departments, although as each department is working towards the budget for 2018, a lot of these action plans that have been presented to us, that will probably be incorporated into the programs that each department is going to be offering as being driven by a budget.
That's the hope, and that's why we set it up the way we did, because we want you to see this so that when we're before you at budget time saying, how much of a goal is this, because it's going to take some resources, staff resources, as well as, capital, to make some of these things happen. So we wanted to put it in this format so you'd see that, and we can start slowly, but we're going to need to start coming before you at budget time.
Right.
Yeah, good point.
Steve?
I've noticed that about, approaching half of the people in this room are participating in the City of Aspen Climate Action Plan Group. And I know that there's a lot of synergy between what you're doing, Cindy, and what Chris is doing on the city. We're both in the process of developing these climate action plans. So I think that's good that we're kind of going along the same process, sort of at the same speed, and able to benefit from each other's efforts.
And we're customizing them to our cultures. We thought that this would be the best way to just kind of get started, get actions going in Pickens County. So that's what's presented before you as far as our draft. It sounds like we've got a couple amendments to make and some thinking to do about how we show those goals as far as outlying years go, and we'll come back.
It's a great start. We're getting there.
Rachel?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And I really liked Steve's comments about what the BOCC is doing. Our comments to keep the methane capture rule, things like that are important. But it also makes me think a little about, are there other departments we really may have not thought of? And, I know Open Space and Trails is doing a lot of the local sustainable farming, and different farming techniques can either add a lot to greenhouse gases or not. And so I think trying to look at this 360, every department probably has some small role they can play.
Definitely, and I can tell you right now that I think that working with environmental health, that will branch out into public health as a whole. I think it's very important for them to be part of what we look at, as well as, like you say, other departments. Everybody can play a role. So.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Sarah, from CORE and staff.
Thank you.
And
Let's
Cindy,
see,
don't go
you're
very
probably
far.
staying right there, Cindy. Cindy and Ellen, are you staying right here for the next part of the conversation? Great.
Thank you.
So we're going to go on to a prep for the joint P&Z meeting.
Right.
Some of this might be pertinent.
Yeah, we're very excited about the 18th. It's a joint meeting between the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners, and it started off as a look at the Transferable Development Rights Program and where we were with that. I don't know if you recall, but on March 28th we had a work session with you about the Transferable Development Rights Program. and some potential code amendments. And from that work session, along with another work session we had with the Planning and Zoning Commission on greenhouse gas emissions, many topics have come up. And what I love about Pickens County is how integrated our code is and how layered we are, with one area of the code affecting another area of the code. And so what we're going to bring forward to you on the 18th is a look not only at the TDR program, but at how we influence some of these other values, the waste, the infrastructure, if you will, the waste, the roads, how we're looking at character, rural character in our new master plans. A lot of that we're going to try to integrate, and it's been a tough memo to write, so we hope you'll bear with us on that and that our presentation will do it justice. But we only have an hour with the P&Z, and so we wanted to try to make it as succinct as possible, but I think everybody's prepped to talk about the bigger picture issues in Pickens County, and included with that are, getting down to the nitty-gritty on some of our code amendments for potentially for TDRs or growth management allocations or those sorts of things that are integrated.
So it's almost like a value clarification exercise in terms of...
It's a balancing exercise. The code definitely reflects the values of the community and where we prioritize those. And we're in a new spot. I keep saying we're refreshing the code. We're not rewriting the code. But we do need to look at where we are balancing all those different community goals. And obviously, greenhouse gas emissions, rural character, waste management, some of the others, what were we talking about? We've been looking at it so hard over the last few days. Transportation, all of those things. Every year, we come up to you at budget time, and you've got more and more things to look at relative to maintaining our community health and well-being from an infrastructure perspective. So how does the land use code influence that? We're not going to get into that in a heavy way, because that would take hours and hours and hours. And so this is sort of a dipping our toe in the water, but making progress towards some of the things you've already given us direction on, like energy consumption, like transferable development right demand for more TDRs, and looking at how our other policies and regulations contribute to some of the issues that we face with our waste management and character.
So how does that look in terms of the outcome of that meeting? If we have a few, we don't know. Yeah, we have a few areas that we've already had some work sessions on, at least with the BOCC, and I don't know if the P&Z has had those same discussions, energy consumption, TDRs, house sizes. So we would have our discussion, maybe share those ideas, see if there's a consensus in terms of direction. Then my question is, where does the P&Z role come in from there? Do they actually recommend or make the changes if we agree on a change?
If code amendments are involved, which my assumption is they will be, then the Planning and Zoning Commission will look at those code amendments initially, make a recommendation to you, and then you amend the land use code. Okay. And the P&Z is charged with looking at the master plans and how things actually are in line with the master plan or inconsistent with the master plan. So they'll be your sort of overall kind of umbrella look at what's going on in the community from a master planning perspective, some of the issues that have come up, and then together, hopefully, you and the Planning and Zone Commission will give us direction. What we've tried to do in the memo is narrow down a couple packages of alternatives for you, and they range in terms of the degree to which you want to make change. And so there'll be kind of TDR amendment light, if you will, all the way to, hey, are we pulling in growth management allocations and, looking at bigger picture kinds of issues. So you'll have the ability to look at all of those, and the way I've seen that throughout these work sessions with the Board of County Commissioners and the Planning and Zoning Commission is one after another, people keep giving us various approaches to explore. So we're looking at each one of those approaches, we're listing them for you so that you see what those are, and then we're packaging them in a, boy, this would make the greatest bang with all these things combined to, well, we can make some change now and move a little slower. Whatever the comfort level is when you sit down with your P&Z to see where you want to head, given the context of the master plans, I think that that's the direction we want to take. We would love to walk away from that work session with some direction to go start cranking on the details of code amendments that we would bring back to you. So that would be our hope.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks. Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. I'm really looking forward to this work session, and I think these are topics that we've brought up before, and sometimes in the context of seeing land use applications that have reached our desk. But one of the things I don't know is currently on our list I really would like to look at is should any GMQS allocation be limited to 5750 per application? And that if you want to pursue a house larger, you have to do it through TDRs, as opposed to, you know, we have 25,000 square feet available, and there's only 2 competitors, so they both get 12,000 square feet. It seems like we're over-allocating, and in my mind, from the prior downzoning to 5750, shouldn't that be the base size of any home that anyone can apply for through GMQS? And that it's just one item to add to the discussion tomorrow. You know, these are comments I will make tomorrow as well during the open meeting.
18th, I hope.
18th, next week.
She's
the 18th, excuse me. But no, tomorrow we have an application in front of us that I would make these comments again. But, you know, we're seeing requests to create a PUD because the lot size isn't big enough for a 10,000 square foot home. And it seems like we're bending over backwards to allocate growth and to create growth where the existing conditions would have limited it. And so that really struck me as like, whoa, are we going in very different directions with our Planning and Zoning Commission?
I think that's the beauty of hopefully the 18th, that we can sync a little bit more with some of our policies, because, you know, in the last couple decades, I'd say we have really tried to use creative methods to accommodate development in certain areas in order to preserve other areas. And now it's all sort of coming to a point where we have to recognize development everywhere, given our pushback and limitations on some of our resources. So that's where we are in the discussion, and I hope we can get a lot done in an hour. I'm sorry I didn't schedule it for more time now, but at least we'll get a start, and it's going to be good.
All right.
Very good.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's see, we're going to go on to a Healthy Rivers grant application for the Colorado Parks Wildlife Little Lime Creek Fish Barrier Project.
Kendall Bakich is supposed to be here. She's with CPW, and she was stuck for 45 minutes in the Glenwood traffic, so the bridge.
And the bridge is open, isn't it?
So I don't know if you want to wait for a little bit. Do you have something else?
We can wait a little bit if you have time, but I don't know your schedules.
The application's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, we have questions. I could try to get her on the phone. We could maybe.
Well, let's just see how it moves along. Why don't you give us a quick overview?
Well, let's see. Go for it. Okay. So on my notes, the CPW submitted this grant application for the Little Lime Creek Fish Barrier Project through our spring grant process program. The River Board unanimously approved the request, and there are funds to support the the program or the request, as the River Board has a line item budget that the BOCC approved during the 2017 process. So we are here today because the request is over $5,000 and needs BOCC authorization. So from there, I was going to let Kendall take it over and describe the project. I don't know if Dave's real familiar with it.
Well, only what I heard from Kendall. This is just the first phase of a multi-phase project, which is to plan and build a fish barrier to essentially trap the fish that are the non-native invasive fish that are in this particular area where they want to repopulate it with native cutthroat trout. And then, so they'll be coming back to us for more, although they're getting funding from multiple sources. They initially came to us in the spring and requested funding for the entire project, and we asked them not to do that because it would have consumed our entire grant budget. So we asked them to break the project up into phases, which they did. Essentially, they did what we asked them to do. It's a pretty ambitious project. It's pretty exciting because it's going to bring native fish back into our area. They essentially have to kill off parasites that are present in the non-native invasive species. Once they isolate them, once they're all gone, then they essentially sanitize through a biological process the remaining water, and then they reintroduce the trout into the new. So this is a multi-year project. Obviously, there's multiple spawning seasons involved in it. It's not the first of its kind, but it's probably one of the most ambitious, that they're undertaking in our particular watershed area. So it's pretty exciting. We kind of like the way that they've approached this, and there's other potential partnerships with them that have larger issues that we haven't fully explored yet that are associated with this. So we could actually partner with them in some more impressive ways to help protect water on this side of the divide.
So, Dave, when you said they originally came before you for the total contribution for the project, when I looked at the funding contributors, it's the total amount of expected contributions is $150,000, $20,000 coming from Healthy Rivers and Stream, but are they saying that is just the first phase, or I don't see
no
the total cost?
The first phase is I'm going back to the original grant request, which isn't in your package.
No, I just was curious what the total.
Getting $20,000 from the Forest Service, $80,000 from CPW, and then smaller grants from us. Western Native Trout Initiative. They have some commitments from Patagonia, Wildlife Foundation, Alpine Bank, the Environment Foundation, SKICO. This phase of the project, basically broke it down so that they weren't. Because it's a 3 or 4 year project. We basically said, can't you make your funding requests at each of our grant cycles so that we're not having to fund this all at one time. And then, of course, they've got funding from other sources. So that's basically how they did it.
And what happens, I was actually just happened to be up the Frying Pan Caucus meeting last night, and there was a representative from CPW there who was talking about this project. And there was a little hesitation on his part in terms of their actual ability to be able to initiate this project because of some funding that they may not have available for them. So these dollars that we grant, if they're not utilized within a certain period of time, do they go back into our fund, Healthy Rivers and Stream Fund, or they just sort of sit out there?
I'm not sure of the logistics of it.
I'm not sure either.
Yeah, I'd be concerned about that.
If they're not going to go forward with it, then obviously we're not going to disperse it.
Right. So do we disperse once? I mean, are we? How those funds get dispersed? Is it upfront, a block grant, or based on the status of the project?
I think we've done it a couple different ways. We've done it just upfront, received, the funding request and we've issued the check. I've not run into that problem before where.
So.
We can ask them to make sure that we're not dispersing any funds if their project funding is either held up or if it doesn't move forward as they proposed it. One of the things about this particular request is they really, first of all, went out of their way to comply with what we asked, so they came back. We didn't give them anything initially. Secondly, they've always been pretty good about following the principles of our grant process, which others who've requested money from us have not done. So, and we've actually sent people away and said, if you want money, you have to follow the process. So they did that, and not only that, their measurement techniques are pretty stringent as compared to some others which are more subjective. So the measurement of this is something that we can use as a guide to making sure that they're actually following through on what they've asked for.
Yeah, all right. Rachel?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and just like any project that we're all putting a part of the funding in, we should make sure the project's going forward before our money's lost to it. And it's not just for design work for a project that may sit on a shelf. But what I was going to say is I've seen their presentation through the the Valley Roaring Fork Watershed Coalition. And what I hadn't realized before is since we have stocked ponds and stocked lakes in Colorado, these fish genetically could have come from anywhere. And they've had to trace back literally records that were 100 years old to find out what populations of fish were put in which places. And so it worked really well for sportsmen, but it kind of outcompeted the native fish. And then the whirling disease came in, and the efforts to create hybrids who are not subject to that, and so on and so forth. So it's really convoluted, and I could never make her a full presentation, but it was just fascinating when they're driving to these little fishery offices, and one place they had just thrown away all of their older records that were on index cards from like 100 years ago, and they're able to pull them out of the dumpster because they just computerized, and we don't need all those old records. But it was just fascinating to find out which fish were introduced when, by who, in private ponds and bigger ponds, everything like that. And so I think it's a great effort to restore more of the native fish, and I'm supportive of the grant.
They showed us the family tree. And it was amazing because it went back literally 100+ years, and it just kept going and going. I mean, it was how they put this thing together was amazing.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was literally a family tree from, back in the 1800s all the way through.
And taking DNA samples from fish in museums and all sorts of stuff.
It was how they did this was just amazing.
I'm definitely in support of it.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm wondering, what does the fish barrier look like? They were talking about needing big boulders to construct it. So do they just make a waterfall that the fish coming upstream aren't able to get up? Or
well, I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is that they have changed their technique, because previously barriers were typically made out of wood with some sort of impermeable front. But if the wood washed away because of excess water or snowmelt or whatever, it didn't hold. So then it had to be reconstructed, essentially started over. So they've changed the whole technique to using more stable foundations. There is I don't want to call it a fabric because I don't know if that's what it is, but it is an actual physical membrane type barrier that prevents it from being penetrated. So basically, you can say they're killing fish and killing disease simultaneously. I mean, that's what they're doing when they create this barrier.
Other questions, comments? Greg?
I just wanted to say I think it's great that you've got a partnership like this going, and I hope we see more of this. And it's very exciting, and I'm reminded and encouraged by seeing how much impact Healthy Rivers has had over the years. We're finally starting to see the fruits of all the years you've put into this, and people on the board here as well. So anyway, congratulations to all of you who helped with this. and you as well, yeah.
So, nod of heads, everyone in favor? Thank you, and
Thanks.
And thanks a lot. Appreciate you coming up for this.
You're welcome.
our apologies to Kendall if you see her.
Yeah, call her right
Yeah,
now.
call her and let her know.
Turn around.
Go back through the 45 minutes of traffic.
Yeah, she can catch the down valley rush now.
Yeah.
All right, I don't see our 240 Citizen Board interviewee here. Suzanne, no idea.
I've been paying a lot of attention.
Probably caught in traffic.
All right, well, we'll give them a little time. Let's move on to future agendas then.
Give me just a second, George. I think this will be fairly short. Just catching up to you. So on July 25th, we are going to cancel the airport update. We had a few of those scheduled in a row that George had pointed out. We are going to replace that, though, with Mike Kramer coming in. There's a upcoming photo shoot at Elk Mountain Lodge he wants to discuss with you guys, so we'll be adding that in to that date. We're also working on the agenda on the 18th also, so there might just be some, not necessarily adjustments to topics, but timing on some of them. We're looking at maybe starting the joint meeting with the Planning Commission at 3:30, but we need to see if those members, since they're volunteers and have other things going on, will be able to adjust their schedules. If not, we may shorten a couple items or get a break in there for you before that joint meeting.
Okay, Patty?
I have one thing on the meeting. Actually, I'm not going to be attending on the 1st with the city. Do we have any agenda items that do we know of yet for that, or just so I know what I'm missing?
I did get an email from Steve today that I haven't had a chance to review in full. I think he is revisiting our recommendation to maybe change the format of those meetings to something more like what we did with Snowmass, where we had a little bit more informal setting together to discuss items. Steve and I have not sat down and talked about specific agenda items yet, or at least firmed up specific agenda items, but I do think that there's going to be a few topics that may be ripe for discussion. So I do think we're going to have an agenda.
Well, I'm going to be bummed if we change the format. I'm not going to be at the meeting because during the campaign for the recent city council election, I made a point with the candidates that we needed to look at this. And I said, we haven't got very far with city council prior. So I think Ann and Ward both took it on. So I'm glad to hear that that discussion is going out there, because our meeting with Snowmass was so great when we had that different forum. I mean, we had created better relationships. We actually had better conversation, and it was a lot more fun.
And Pay, let me just see if I can pull up and see if there were any topics.
That's okay. We could.
Okay.
At any rate, we don't have any time set aside on Tuesday, July 25th for prep for the joint meeting.
And we had talked about that, so it hasn't made it on to these future agendas yet. Yeah.
Okay.
And similarly, I believe the school district was also missing prep
Yeah, that
time.
one's on the. When is that one?
That is August 24th,
Yeah.
Yeah,
a Thursday.
that's when George will be gone, right, George?
Yes.
And we had talked about that Thursday, the 24th meeting before. It's the same day as the district meeting for CCI. And, in looking at the 4 items we submitted and a little bit of complexity there, I think I will be attending the CCI district meeting and Steve will be attending the school board meeting.
And that's the same day as the COG meeting, but it should be over by 3, so
Right.
I'm good, because it's here in town.
All right, anybody else have anything for future agendas?
No, I think it's good.
Let me keep looking through here.
Wonder if we want to take a break,
Yeah, let's take a
George,
break
and then
now. Let's
see
take
if our
a-
candidate shows up.
Let's take a 15-minute break, back here at 3 o'clock.
Perfect. August 9th.
And I'll go ahead and text Rich and let him know we might be running early.
Okay, August 15th.
We're live. We're live.
All right, we're going to move on to board open discussion. John, do you have anything today?
I don't have anything for you today.
Anybody else have anything?
Oh, I do.
Patty, yes?
Did we make a decision on the youth appointments for the Healthy Community Fund? I don't think we have.
I don't think we've had any interviews.
We had the two interviews.
We had the two interviews. There are two high school seniors that interviewed, and I
don't think we've done a formal
we should have brought
resolution.
those.
I
yeah,
would
we
like
should
to
have brought those
formally
back.
appoint both of those young folks and make the appointment formal on resolution. Okay.
I must have, maybe I missed that.
I can't remember.
I was
Yeah.
out maybe that work session.
So, Patty, thank you for bringing that up because I think we missed maybe bringing that back for.
So
closure.
that was one thing. This other thing is, when are we going to discuss the landfill sign that we all toured today?
Well, they'll come back. Brian will come back with,
Okay.
With
The actual wording.
and
Just
things
wanted
like
to make sure that we had that plan. And I think that's all that I had.
Okay, Steve?
I received from CC4CA an attachment, and there is a county climate coalition which has been spearheaded by Santa Clara County in California. And they initially asked if any individual commissioners or city councilmen would want to sign on, or I think there are actually some city council people signing on. There are several from Colorado have signed on. And then I think they're asking if entire counties would want to join their coalition. And it's largely in reaction to President Trump pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement, to have counties stepping up to the plate and saying they're going to uphold it. So it's largely what we've already done here in Colorado, but and I have not figured out how to send this notice separately from a whole bigger email that doesn't really have a lot to do with this, but maybe I could give it
To John, they can
and you
scan
could
it in.
Scan it in, and then we could send it around just so you would know, everybody would know, and we could look at the material and maybe decide at some point if individually or as a group we wanted to participate in a national
Sounds
effort
good.
on it.
Yeah, I'd like to see more information and see if there's a price tag attached.
Okay. Anybody else have anything for open discussion? Greg?
At some point, I'd like to bring somebody in or discuss further this whole idea of it's going around the state with CDOT and Parks and Wildlife regarding the wildlife overpasses or wildlife corridors, making it easier for wildlife to move around the state. Certainly a north-south migration or movement routes. But I think there are other smaller ones that should be considered. And I'd like to start thinking about, what we can do to accommodate trail building for wildlife or returning their trails to them. We've had a huge drop in populations of elk and deer in the last 20 years, much of it due to habitat loss, fragmentation. We've got high casualty rates on the highways, not only for wildlife, but for people as well and property. And so it's become an issue, and I think it'd be good for us to be out in front with it in association with other counties and other entities in the state. Fish and Wildlife, DOW, BLM, everybody seems to think this is important and should be pursued, and it's a joint effort between private property owners and municipalities and counties and the various federal agencies. So I'm going to, there are a couple people that could speak on this and maybe give us some insight. I know these migration areas and corridors have been mapped fairly thoroughly. There's not any real new information, but it'd be good to put it out there. So it's interesting to me. I'd like to bring that to a future meeting.
Are you thinking specifically for Pickens County?
I'd like to learn what, definitely, specifically to us, because that's where we have some influence. But I think it's a statewide effort, and we could contribute and just look at what's possible in Pickens County or what might be needed.
If I could, CDOT was hosting an all-day Transportation Wildlife Corridors Crossings Summit, which I forwarded the information to Gary Tenenbaum, and he's had an intern attending, and I'm not sure if that's actually happened yet.
Yeah, I was there.
You were there as
and,
well?
Lindsay.
And Lindsay,
there.
well, I was just wondering if it would make sense for them, our staff, to update us on what was said and what's going on in that process, and maybe take it
Good
from
point.
there.
Great point.
Kind of approach.
Another option would be maybe when we do our Region 9 update with CDOT, if this is a joint effort with
Asking the
CDOT and
folks on that.
DPW, if they would
Good
make
idea.
that a portion of their presentation, that gives us a good sense then of where that fits in CDOT's priorities and funding opportunities and those sorts of things. And we could certainly have our staff attend for that portion that's been involved. I do not know when we've got that next Region 9 update.
Let's don't
It's
forget
usually in the
this.
fall, I think.
It's usually in the fall
usually-
after the asphalt plants have closed and they can't
Fair
do
enough, and
any
they
more
can do
work
it.
on our roads.
So that may be too far out, Greg, but we
Maybe
do
not.
have an annual meeting with our Region 9 representatives from CDOT and our CDOT commissioner. It might be a good opportunity
Yeah.
to raise
So
that as an
they'll
issue.
come here and meet with us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
wondering if we want to invite a CPW representative at the same time. Because it seems that they're in alliance,
Have our
they're
local
coordinating
guy.
on that. Thank you.
I'm glad you were able to attend that.
You can bring one rack, full rack, half rack, and
Yeah, big rack, yep,
Big
I'll
rack.
bring them in.
Anything else for open discussion? All right, we'll move on. I see all of our players here for our facilities update now. Thank you for coming in a little early. We're running a little ahead of schedule.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Rich Engelhardt, Chief Operation Officer for Pickens County.
Dave Detweiler, your project manager.
And Gabe Muthing, Aspen Ambulance District Director.
So thank you for the opportunity. We wanted to, as part of a facilities update, is present to you and also the public kind of where we're at with the assessment. We've got a recommendation that we'd like to make and talk about next steps dealing with the ambulance barn that it as it currently sits. So we'll go ahead and get started here. We usually start, as you know, looking at what challenges may be out there and do a kind of a problems assessment. So we started out looking at the present location, and these are just a few of the issues that are going on with the current building, that it is undersized for modern ambulances. In fact, if we were going to add, I believe, fire protection in there, those ambulances just do not fit in that barn. So it's certainly in poor condition. It's been there for a number of years. AVH expansion there has also caused the fire district to alter their location where they store their ambulances, and increased volumes have led to additional staffing, and then just limited space for any type of expansion. So that was what we found at the present location seemed to be the major issues itself. So back then, a solution was to go to the voters to ask them to approve a ballot question. And in 2014, that was the case. You all as commissioners had that placed on the ballot. The commentary at the time was that a yes vote would allow for through a full public process with you as a board acting as the ambulance district board to borrow against tax revenue stream to replace or remodel its aging facility.
can I just real quick? But that commentary was not actual part of the the ballot language, right? I mean,
Correct.
that was just one of the things to get people to support. Okay,
Absolutely,
want to make
yeah.
sure we have that.
Yeah, the ballot language is shown
pretty clear.
below that, but you're absolutely right, Commissioner. And as shown by the voters, 62% margin of voter approval, so it passed overwhelmingly. So with that, we hired Dave Detweiler with his firm had gone out and was asked to kind of do an assessment, an overall assessment. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave from here.
Yeah, so at the time the bond passed, there was not a specific program done or a specific location. So Gabe and I had many meetings to review what scope we needed for either a new or remodeled facility. At that point, it wasn't determined what it would be. We looked at could we remodel or expand the existing building and what options we might have for a new building location. The scope is defined up there for what that new I won't say the ideal facility, but a facility that met their needs for now and into the near future. 11 to 13,000 square feet, apparatus base for 4 ambulances plus 2 support vehicles, 4 to 5 bunk rooms, and associated spaces. So this plan is showing you, I'll grab the mouse here, the existing facility. Oh, I'm going to try to do it lefty. This is the existing building. You can see where the hospital road pushed farther in this direction and took away this zone that the ambulance district used to use for storage of their vehicles. They had a little tent structure out there. So not only was this building undersized, but we took away that outside storage as well. The existing facility is very small. It was built quite some years ago. Ground level of 3 bays. Upstairs has a day room with a small kitchen, 2 offices. What is now called as a training room has actually been subdivided for some other office residential type use. So very crammed. We actually looked at this building as a possible 911 dispatch center. So we were already very familiar with the building and its shortcomings. It's on its last leg. So again, the existing building was too small. We looked at. Do we have that plan up here of the expansion of the site? So we looked at what can we do in the existing location. The site sits in a hill. If you've been out there, you have to kind of walk up steeply. There's a back patio on the back where they have their barbecue. Physically, we could install where the yellow line is shown a retaining wall that is somewhere in the magnitude of 15 feet tall plus. And create a flatter area here, the shape of this blue box. Even that does not give you a really functional footprint, and it has a big impact on the neighbors in that we are pushing our presence way back into that hillside, taking out a lot of trees to do that. And we'd be demolishing an existing building that, while it is aged, it has some other uses, whether it be for a hospital maintenance facility, a county maintenance facility. There's been a handful of things discussed that building would be useful for. So we looked at some other opportunities, other locations. The bond proceeds did not allow, in our opinion, the funding to buy a piece of property. So we were looking at possible donations, repurposing of properties. We talked to the McBride folks about their property just to the downhill side of the North 40 Fire Station. We looked at the North 40 Fire Station. We looked at building a new facility on the property. We looked at the lot out at Owl Creek. There's what they call the Triangle property, which is out there by the hospital now. We even talked to the Forest Service about their building that currently houses the open space and trails folks. There's a map of how far that search went. We also looked at some options that came up through conversations about potential cohabitation with the fire department, and we looked at their downtown facility, and while this map may show, it could house an ambulance, it could jointly house a few people. As we went through the logistics of that operationally, it just didn't seem to provide any benefit and didn't really reduce our costs for what the new facility would be. We looked out at the North 40 station. We looked at some potential for expansion. And again, none of those proved to be viable alternatives for us. So where we came back was to the existing facility. We'll look at that in a minute. At the HHS site, we identified some space that seems to be doesn't have any zoning issues. It has the same sort of traffic issues that we've had before. We've got a perpetual easement on that site that allows us to do what we want to do. It provides for the proper sized facility with excellent access into the road network. The hospital board is supportive of the option, and we believe it does coordinate well with our future growth needs at HHS, that we could identify and integrate those appropriately.
Can you define perpetual easement? I
could. There's a whole host of documents that have been unearthed as we looked at this facility, and I think John used the term it's suitably gray, or it's just
perpetual.
It's not real defined as to how it all came together and where everybody sits right now. John?
Yeah, so this is one of the, I think, unique elements of the partnership that was established back when this land was county land, and it was traded to the hospital for the purpose of building the hospital. The old hospital site then was able to be converted to affordable housing, and as a result, we also received two kind of property interests on the property that we formerly owned. One was a 50-year lease upon which the existing ambulance facility is built. We own the building, but it is on leased land that is owned by the hospital. The other is the parcel that our Health and Human Services building sits on that we're talking about now, where the hospital owns the land, but the county owns a property interest in it, which is the perpetual easement. And the perpetual easement allows us to develop on the property for the purposes of providing health and human services and for facilities that are generally consistent with the functions of the hospital. It is it's a unique arrangement. And so our discussion, though, with the hospital has been that clearly the ambulance facility fits within the 4 squares of what we read as intended in that perpetual easement. Frankly, we see as an opportunity maybe as we do these transactions, we'll probably need to have another intergovernmental agreement with the hospital regarding the properties and such, and that may be an opportunity to clear up some of the
I was asking because, again, we're going to be owning a building on land we don't technically own. I just want to make sure we're really careful with that.
Yeah, the building really has no transactional value because the easement is granted to the county in perpetuity. So even if the ownership were to change, the only entity that could develop or use the property because of that easement would be the county.
Would be the county.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is clear as
In
mud, though.
perpetuity.
Yeah.
John, does that include the 45 space parking lot is included in the land that we have the easement on?
That is correct, and parking would be another issue that we need to do some more work on, whether the surface is parking, and we may get into that. The advantage of the perpetual easement, just going back to that for the hospital, is the hospital still needs to grant permission for us to apply and that sort of thing, so it keeps the hospital at the table for any development that's going to happen on that campus. And so I think that was the goal. It's not really clear why we did it that way, but if I were to speculate, that was the goal when we put that arrangement together.
So as part of this process, Gabe had worked with Dave, as he had mentioned, and had done pros and cons on all these locations. And now we're going to have Gabe talk about the operational benefit of this particular location and that relationship.
Well, as Dave mentioned earlier, we did get together and look at the different locations, but as Dave is a builder, I'm much more the operations side. And what we wanted to really look at was, were we in the right place to begin with? Are we operating with the most efficiency from the right location? For us, as we looked through this and looked at all the different locations, we started to do analysis of run time, how long it took us to get to calls, emergently, non-emergently, where are the bulk of our calls. And as odd as it sounds, I think we really have the best location possible in the HHS site. It really is a central location for us, and more importantly, it's really a central location that has value more than just in its location. The value for us really comes in being close to the hospital. If you think of all medical calls where we transport a patient, they're going to end at the hospital. So being close in proximity to the hospital itself really does work out well for us. The other thing that we gain a huge advantage from with putting our ambulances at that location right next to the hospital, and not to sound grim, but occasionally when we go on calls, they are a little bit more intense than others and take a lot of cleaning of the ambulances, take a lot of restocking of the ambulances. The problem with that is it takes time. And that's time that we usually don't have if another call comes in directly afterwards. So now what we can do with this location is if we do have to go through that need of changing supplies and cleaning an ambulance, rather than doing that for the second call, we abandon that ambulance, walk across the street to the building, grab another ambulance, and we're ready to go. So a very, very efficient operation in that respect. Good. One of the things that we utilize is a hub and spoke model, which is where we're in the central location, and we really do have easy access to every point. And if you think about our district, it really does give us good access both in town and also to the farthest reaches, Lanedo, Woody Creek, Aspen Village, and we want to be able to provide the same response times or as close as possible to everybody in our district for sure. Response time standards nationally are really tough. Every community is different, so there aren't great response time standards other than urban standards, which I would argue we're not very close to urban. NFPA, National Fire Protection Agency, has a standard that does say, does give a rough estimate for urban, and we actually meet that. So we're doing really well. We have good efficiency. We have good service. And I think that the location that we're looking at really meets that. The one thing I'd also like to point out is the advantage of having us close to the hospital is our staff have an amazing opportunity to spend more time with patients. And for us, that's important mainly because of experience. We're still a small community. We still have a moderate volume. We're a high volume for a community of our size, but still a moderate volume. Where our guys benefit and where our community benefits is having paramedics that have great experience levels. And the way that we can do that is if, for example, if I haven't started an IV in a little while, I can walk down to the hospital and I can start IVs all day long and get great experience. Not a lot of smaller communities have that ability for their EMS services. So for us to be close, we can go to surgery, we can go to the ER, we can go to the OB unit and get that experience while we're on duty and really having a great advantage in that respect. So overall, as we look throughout all the operational benefits of putting an ambulance at the HHS site, putting a centralized location there, everything really pointed back to this recommendation that you're getting today to put it directly and centrally on one site.
And so that recommendation, is it based on this operational analysis and the location, the study that was performed that the county manager asked us to take an in-depth look at? Is it staff's recommending that this would be the location? And as you can see, there's 45 parking spaces. It's the yellow line that kind of surrounds that is where that perpetual easement is at. That takes into account the red, the green, and the yellow itself. The red is the location we would propose for the facility itself, and then the green is where the possible expansion into that. So Dave, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the red box actually has great. These arrows are intended to show where those apparatus bays would feed in and out, so you can get direct access right out onto the driveway, really similar to what they have now, which is great, right across from the ER. There is a Nordic Trail easement through here. We're sure we could maintain that. It's not really an actively used easement through there. And again, this yellow box, as you see, sorry, my mouse is kind of hidden, kind of comes back up here, turns into the red box. That's really that property that we have the perpetual easement on. It's kind of defined. It's a little bit hard to read. And so the zone in here, we know over time HHS will have needs. And so the idea was to, as we got into programming this building, to at the same time involve the HHS folks in a dialogue to say what what might your future needs be, so that clearly, as we've shown, we don't want vehicle access bays coming in and out of this side that would block any future growth of HHS. And so we've just kind of designated this zone that will work here early to figure out programmatically what might that want to be, and then design this building around that so that we don't landlock them. And then the conversation here is we have surface parking now. We know we're already short on parking. Hospital is already deficient on parking from their last go-round. While it may be painful in the short term, in the long term, a parking structure or some sort of levels of parking might be advantageous. So we've discussed at least including in our design RFP a conversation about that to investigate what it might look like, what it might take, how deep would we need to go, what would we get into, to at least know what our options would be to see if we can all benefit from more parking there.
And we've also talked about the potential of kind of repurposing the area here in front as part of that study as well. So with that recommendations, where we would go, the next step with your approval is we would issue an RFP for the design team. It would include the design of the new facility, the programming aspect that Dave just talked about, and then the parking itself. We'd anticipate getting a design team on within the next 6 to 8 weeks. Permitting, design permitting, another 8 to 9 months, with construction to begin possibly in the spring of 2018. And then one thing I wanted to show you, this kind of communication flow chart, so to speak. I think we use this whenever we were talking about our project next door and how it involves the different parties. So certainly at the top of this are the residents and citizens of not only the Pitkin County, but of these districts that live within those districts, and the Board of Commissioners acting as the ex officio ambulance district representative. Our communication will be with John, a county manager, who certainly dialogues with you all, and then a partner and stakeholder in this is Aspen Valley Hospital, and John has certainly been in touch with Dave. We meet on a regular basis and have had these kind of conversations, but he would certainly keep his board informed. And then Gabe, who is the contracting party to this, certainly plays a role between the two. Our project team be made up of myself as your owner's rep. Dave Detweiler will be our project manager, and Gabe. And then also Nan Sundin is our human services director. We've put her on board to have those discussions about what that future looks like in that property, to help us address those parking issues and what this whole construction would look like. And then also Steve Selby from Aspen Valley Hospital will be on the project team. We certainly will reach out to our specialists from facilities, Jody Smith, who is already engaged in the facilities that stands now. John Albers is going to also be involved to assist with his expertise. And then on the finance side, we have Ann, Tom Oken, and Connie Baker, who will be getting engaged here upon your approval to start looking at this from the standpoint of the financing aspect. And then we'll procure through our procurement office. We set up like we do here with the project. We'll meet every other Wednesday. We meet weekly here, but we'll probably meet every other week. Bring the project specialists in as needed, and then we'll certainly plan on doing like Dave and I do on a monthly update to you all as board, bringing you the updates and certainly bringing back any decisions that need to be made through the county manager back to the board. So with that is where we stand right now.
So I see a couple hands up, but Rich, as we're going through the RFPs, we just had a pretty good presentation on our draft climate action plan, and within that, we know that 70% of our built environment contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. So I would hope that we're looking at the state of the art in terms of any opportunities we have to utilize our draft climate action plan and ways that we can showcase this as any of our new buildings in the county to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Who do I see up? Greg, then Rachel, then Patty, then Steve.
Okay. So, thanks, George. I appreciate that comment. That was great that you brought that up. I wanted to ask just about a couple things. One about traffic planning. That intersection down off of Castle Creek Road is going to become busier, I assume. I had some calls, and I know it's a city intersection. We've gone through this before. Calls from somebody who lives up in the subdivision above that who said that they're very concerned about accident potential from coming off Castle Creek, turning into one of the other intersections. And the addition of an ambulance barn, more activity there, parking lot might be something to consider. So I'm hoping that becomes part of the conversation. No doubt it will. Then the other thing was a concerned citizen called me last night and said, we really need to have an ambulance in town. And I said, well, I think, Gabe, you brought that up last time you were here. And I think what you said is the ambulance serves town rather well. It's 50% of our calls in the county. Is that correct?
That is correct.
An ambulance serving the town doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be in a building in town as much as it just needs to be in town and available. Is that part of the planning for, as this expands, that we have is there a satellite roving ambulance, the way they park them at the base of the ski hill in the winter? What can we say to assure people that service from town will be continuous and improved and high quality?
Well, I think certainly, right now I'm very comfortable saying that we do provide a very, good service, a very rapid and efficient service in town for sure. That being said, we know of times when it's busier. We know of times when, certainly, in the winter, there's certain, at the bottom of the ski hills, certainly gets busier. Food and wine is an example. So we move ambulances strategically throughout the day and throughout, different parts of the weekend to try and match that. It's a game though. Right? We're always trying to put an ambulance as close as possible to your heart attack. And we're doing our best to always do that. But again, it's a game. How do we actually do that every time efficiently? We can put an ambulance at a certain location. That doesn't mean that your heart attack's going to happen there. It can happen right back where we put it before. So what we try and do is maximize our responses. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that hub and spoke model allows us to essentially put the ambulance in a nice central location that gives us easy access to all those outward points efficiently and quickly every time.
Thank you for that.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you, George. That reminded me of I've heard in the past that you station them at the music festival during the summer, and you wouldn't think of that, but perhaps that's where they've had some calls from heat exhaustion or whatever in the past. So I support the hub and spoke model that you're using. I also was thinking about the Castle Creek and Road, and I think that's really going to require some look. I mean, we had an ambulance facility there before, and it's still been up there even as the hospital has finished its expansion. But, it is all pushing the envelope. And I don't know if you get to a point where it's worth having a 4-way or a 3-way stop on Castle. That does start to be a bit of a straightaway there. People are kind of heading towards the roundabout. I'd hate to think it would require a traffic light, but the configuration has to be safety as much as access for both within the area when you've made the turn as well as on Castle Creek. So I want to have a real hard look at that and with our partners at the city on that. But it is quite the straightaway, and you look at all that's happening more in town with speed bumps and bike lanes and stop signs and traffic calming measures. This might be a road that's starting to be primed for that too. I am wondering, maybe you covered it, but I missed it a little bit as you were going through. Should we have to do something with the 45 spaces for parking? We're losing 14 spaces, and I imagine your ambulance drivers come and leave their cars currently at the facility as well. That we should start looking seriously at the programming for the expanded parking area. And the model I like, and I would hope it's possible for this, is something like the cut and cover parking at the Aspen Meadows with the tennis courts on top, but instead reinforced enough for the weight of cars. You don't get into ventilation issues with that sort of garage. It's only one layer, and probably, but again, the visuals and the site and how deep you have to go are the big issues there. But I think we should start to look at that, because I'd love maybe an opinion from whether it's our bond counsel or whoever, but it seems that this relocation is necessitating at least some contribution to a change in the parking structure, both the loss of the 14 spaces plus the parking for the actual ambulance district employees. That seems to be part of the facility. It's not a separate item. And so I'd love to see what, if any, contribution from that mill levy can go towards that. And we should be planning that as we go, even if it's not implemented first, because it will make some grade changes and it will make layout changes to that larger area. So those are my two comments. And then the question I have is if you could give us more detail about what will the public process be like going forward.
So I think we'd like to come back to you on the public process, but our conversations with the hospital is we need to have both entities participating equally in that public process. And we would also envision, I think right now, as we intend to go out to RFP for the architects and such, doing a public process similar to what we did with our downtown facilities. We think we had a very good public dialogue around that. So that involved, the problem definition phase, which was touring folks around and sitting down before pencil touches paper to talk about, what would folks like to see in a new facility? So particularly with the neighbors and such, and what types of concerns do they want a design to reflect, and a design to be going forward. We then asked for a couple, some number of conceptual designs that try and work towards what we heard, and then we invite the community back in to tell us which concept do they think best matches what they told us they wanted to see, and to provide comments that may allow us to narrow down on one and then to amend that one. And obviously that is always with, at each step, coming back to this body as the governing board. And I'd expect involvement with the hospital, which is what we're still working out since it's really part of their campus. But going through that iterative step process, it's a little bit slower up front, but I think it really helped us move through more quickly because we had a design that was either exciting people or at least acceptable to folks going forward. So I think it would be a pretty similar process.
And so we would be clear that the public process was not about a site selection. It was more about building
Correct.
Design and how that fits in.
We are so limited in site selection at this point.
And then we'd be working backwards from hopefully shooting for a groundbreaking spring of 2018.
I'm going to look at the project team for that one.
That's the goal. Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah, and Rachel, we had this similar situation with the downtown facility. It's being constructed is we were very constrained on where it could go. We had basically one option. And take the opportunity to explain that, but then to really focus in on what makes this work. We'll also have other stakeholders at the table because we have our human service partners who, we also need to be thinking about that footprint and what does that look like.
Okay, thank you.
Patty?
What has not been part of this discussion is the discussion we're supposed to be having with the fire district. And I don't want, the thing was the fire district had asked to speak with us before we moved into a building phase, and I know it's going to take us a while to actually break ground, but I think that's critical and it needs to be addressed, that we do have that discussion with them, because we said we would.
And I had followed up with Carl Adams after that, and we had a discussion about, the facility versus whatever future partnerships may be a possibility. And I think that request, we'll keep that dialogue open,
Just
but
want to
that
make sure
request
we're
is
clear on
shifted.
that, you have up front. So that was one of my concerns. The other one, which was mostly addressed, was the public involvement. Because if you read it, it sounds like we're going to have a building design and then we're going to bring the public in. So I'm glad you clarified that it's going to be the process we used for our building, which really I think worked well. I am concerned about size. I don't want to be building because we can build 14,000 square feet. I want to be building because we need whatever square footage. Training facilities, we need to look at what other options we might have for training facilities. Do we really need to have another training facility that we have to maintain and heat and cool and clean? Or could there be better purpose? Or could we, the hospital has some great rooms that are right across the parking lot. So I think that needs to be brought into the mix too, because that neighborhood has been hit so hard with construction that it's going to be tough for them to think another 14,000 square foot building. Besides the noise and the dust and the traffic for construction, we need to really keep that in mind as we're designing the size.
Steve?
Thanks, George.
In terms of parking structures, there's one at 9th and Cooper in Glenwood that has basically used the ground level for the bottom one, and they just built the pillars and then the second floor on it. So that one would be worth looking at, like the Aspen Meadows one. And also looking at the map, I don't know if it's been considered, but in terms of expanding the HHS building, it seems like coming out this way could be an option. Coming out this way, or perhaps doing a wing off this way also somehow.
Steep slope on that
To,
one.
for future expansion, because I know you're showing the green area out the one end, but I think there's other options for that. Then the green area could potentially be used for something to do with the ambulance facility.
Parking. Can I ask a question about parking? I think Nan is in the room. Where do employees for the Human Health Services building currently, do they get to park there?
In that parking.
So, we don't always provide parking for employees. I hate to say this, but we need to take that into consideration. Because our employees downtown had to figure it out. We didn't provide a parking lot for them. So we provided the parking lot for the entities that needed the parking lot. So we need to be talking about that too, and maybe come up with some other options as far as employees getting to and from work. I mean, it's a luxury in this community to be able to have a place to park where you work.
One of the things, and we can certainly look
Just
at that,
part of the
Patty.
discussion.
Yeah, and one of the things we're managing is a lot of the employees are also responding, so they'll have vehicles there in some cases because they're responding off-site.
Oh.
Sorry,
Yeah,
responding
but we
off-site
need to bring that in
incidents,
because there's a lot of people who don't leave the building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I think we've added Nan to this project team just for those kind of discussions.
We want to make
she
sure
knows
that
absolutely
what
all the
works.
impacts that this has,
Yeah.
and she's going to be valuable to that.
And I
this
think, the
ongoing discussion.
reconfiguration of the maybe one way, so because the bus comes in and then you have that other, so that would have lessen maybe expansion this direction of the parking lot.
Yeah.
So there's some opportunities, I think.
Yeah.
One other thought on the traffic circulation. You have two ways in and out of the HHS building around the parking lot. One of those could potentially be eliminated and made into more parking spaces. Because you already have the turnaround right in front of the building.
That's
So
what I would just
You
said.
could come in one way and have the turnaround and go out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But they have rafter that comes in and could go out, so you have to think
Yeah,
about
it
that.
has to be the size of a rafta circumference for getting out.
Okay. Well, lots of good ideas, and I'm sure you'll bring that back when we start looking at designs.
So our next step then is to issue an RFP for an architect and then to initiate the public process. And we still need to nail down, we are right at the beginning of this planning phase. So We still need to nail down timeline, process, all of that going forward.
Yeah, I don't want to short circuit any of those components, but I do want to keep in mind that if the current economic boom continues for the next 9 months, pricing for construction, materials, things like that will continue to rise. And so that's why I really want us to get some sort of break ground date target and then work backwards from there.
Totally and we're very conscious that, we've had 8 to 10% kind of construction inflation as we've been going through this. Yeah.
Okay.
Or we could wait till the bus cycle happens, which will
There's
happen.
always that. There's a correction. It's
In a few years, it definitely will happen. Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I know Cindy said she's on her way over.
saw her.
Not all of her staff can make it at 4, so they're going to be trickling in over the next 15 minutes or so.
All right, let's take a short
Thanks for
break.
that.
5 minutes.
Let's take a 10-minute break here. It's 3:45, 3:55. Come back.
We've got a 5 o'clock conference call, so the schedule is working out well. I've got a
Something, and I thought it was a hamstring, but it's just runs right here.
right, not on the side?
No, it's behind.
Oh, I would think that's
A hamstring, yeah. I didn't think I had big enough hamstrings to pull. Yeah, that's a good thing. I don't know.
I know. Others will be coming in as we're talking, hopefully. But thank you for having us and having a chance to get together again and talk about where we are with community development and some of the big highlights and things that have been going on for our department. As you know, community development is planning and zoning, building, and environmental health. But environmental health is going to be moving to the public health department in 2018, and they will still be serving a function with community development to help get the permits out the door relative to on-site wastewater treatment system. But much of what environmental health does relate to public health, such as restaurant inspections and watching for different pandemics in the community. So they are going to be working with Karen in the public health department. So we are narrowing down a little bit for the building department and the planning and zoning department in our office. But I'd say some of the biggest stuff that's happened with us this year is trying to pull together our new permit review process system, and as it relates mainly to the building permits that we have. And in doing that, we reorganized our staffing so that we would have more upfront staff interaction with the public as applications for building permits come in the door. So we have a much more robust way of looking at our pre-submittals, ensuring that we're getting everything in the door that we need. Before we take anything in, we want to make sure that we have all the materials. Then it goes through basically a zoning review process to ensure that all the planning and zoning compliance has been addressed in the building permit application, so that what we've approved on the planning end of things early on actually happens on the ground. And once we've looked at all of that compliance, then the permits move into the building permit review for the international building codes, and we move those along. In doing that, as I've said, we have reorganized our office somewhat, and I don't know, because the people who are our permit coordinators who stand at the front desk are refusing to leave. Oh, good, they came. Bonnie and Christy, please stand up and say hello. You guys may know Bonnie and Christy from, they've been in the office for a while, but now their titles are permit techs or permit coordinators. Bonnie and Christy are responsible, along with a third position which we have not filled, and we are looking for the right person to fill that job. What their position is that they are they're helping us with the applicants up front to get all the materials we need submitted in an electronic format, and then review of that material and sending the application material to the various referral agency groups. And as part of our referrals in-house, we have planning and zoning and environmental health. And then we also have external referrals, fire department, and prior to coming into the office, we send things to the city if they in fact have needs to review the application. So as part of our planning and zoning review, we have our planners and our planners who emphasize the look at the zoning materials. So we have Larissa Lalonde. Lalonde. I get it wrong every time. Lalonde. I always say it wrong. We have Alyssa, who you've met, who is our new code enforcement officer, sitting next to her, Alyssa Dixon. We're so excited that Catherine Berg has returned as our engineer, our planning engineer. And then we have our planners, Mike, and Tammy. So I'm going to leave it at that and not mess up anybody else's name.
Cindy Halbin?
Yeah, Halbin. Yeah, that's how you say my name. So you know Brian and you know Suzanne, and I'm going to turn it over to them to kind of talk a little bit more about the specifics and some of the details that we're seeing right now relative to the number of applications we're seeing and kind of where we are with our budget and some of the more interesting projects that we're working on right now. So I don't know, Suzanne, if you want to start with some of the planning.
Sure, I can do that. So basic numbers, which it's hard to translate into much, but since the first of the year, we've gotten 50 land use applications, 15 special event applications. That was when I looked last week. There are probably more that have rolled in since then. That doesn't account for ones that have still been hanging around since prior last year, or even before that, since some don't seem to necessarily keep moving, but that's probably about another 15. So we have a pretty hefty, pile of caseload. And I think what's maybe difficult for you guys is you only see a portion of that or a small percentage of that in terms of what actually comes forward to the BOCC, those bigger applications. Meanwhile, everybody's cranking away on a lot of activity envelopes and site plans and those special events that don't come before you. We're touching building permits now a lot more than we ever were to try and bring that connection between the planning land use review and the building permit. Not once we're done with ours, we walk away and leave it to everybody else. We're trying to help in that process to tie that more together. So the planners are a lot more involved than they have been in, with that building permit intake process. So that's kind of a quick shot at what's going on. I think where everybody feels very busy. It's always this busy this time of year, but it's amazing. Every day something rolls in the door where you go, boy, that wasn't what I thought I was going to be dealing with today. And that it could be one thing or it could be 6 or 10 of those. The planner of the day line is busy, emails rolling in, calls coming in. And it runs the gamut from things that are very simple questions of what's my zoning, where we try and teach people how to use maps and more online so they can look up information for themselves. Great tool, great to have available to people, to things that, could result in, land use applications down the line. But so a lot of time spent juggling just the stuff that rolls in day to day with, oh, right, I have these deadlines for board packets, P&Z packets, hearing officer packets, admin decision deadlines, trying to crank out those pieces of work. So, so busy. Big project-wise, really the only one that's kind of really rising to the surface at this point, not to say that there aren't others out there, but the Redstone Castle is, clearly we're starting to move in on bringing kind of their first application in front of you later in August. But we're having lots of conversations with their planning team, and kind of this is just a first step in kind of where they want to head with uses for the castle, and so we anticipate further applications as part of that, and that's taken a lot of sort of time, staff time to talk through with their team, what is it they want, how do we get there, what's the process to walk through that. Obviously the involvement with the caucus and there's a lot of information out there about what they might be asking for, but what are they really asking for now, and so there's a lot of managing of kind of those moving parts and some of the rumor mill, which always happens when these things come up. So that's kind of just basic rundown. Obviously, everyone's here if you have questions specifically for anybody, or if anybody thinks I missed anything, feel free to throw it out there. But that, I think, gives you a general idea of what's going on our side of the world.
We're missing our long-range planner. That's another important part of your department, and I'm just curious how the caucus master plans are moving along, or how many are left to go, and what the status is. And also, we know that Ellen does such a great job as a referral agency, responding to all the requests as a cooperating agency, that she is able to draft our comments and forward them on, whether it be the Forest Service or another county or whatever.
Right, the long-range planning portion of our office, we really do focus with the Planning and Zoning Commission on the master plans. And the way Pickens County has chosen to do master plans is to allow caucus areas or neighborhood caucus groups to work on master plans under the umbrella of the Pickens County policies and guidelines. And we've worked closely with a number of neighborhoods who have had their plans adopted. We have Emma, we have Woody Creek adopted, and gosh.
Frying pan.
Pardon me?
Frying pan.
The frying pan adopted. We are working, I believe the Crystal is adopted as well, and we're working, in some areas there are not as strong neighborhood groups, but they are still involved. And we've had some caucus areas split this year when we've got the Maroon and Castle Creek split. So we're waiting on individual plans to come in. But we are starting to talk about going ahead and getting master plans accomplished now so that we don't have too much discrepancy in when they get approved. So it might be a combination of staff submitted plans versus neighborhood submitted plans, just so that we don't get too far off the back. We have East of Aspen still to update. They don't feel that they have any new information that they need, but we do have some standardized things that we are placing in each master plan now. So we're going to bring those forward along with the Brush Creek master plan. And then we want to work with BOCC, and we have been trying to schedule kind of the outskirts of BOCC, sort of a BOCC urban growth boundary, if you will, planning effort with BOCC, and we've been trying to work on that given the timing of their master plan. So we have several that are still in process, but hope to bring those to you within the next couple months. And we will be looking at some code rewrite that Ellen and I will probably be facilitating or coordinating that overall approach with the planners on specific language for various code sections. We will have, and we do have some funding that was provided for 2017 that we plan on using to work with some consultants for help on that as well.
Oh, good, thanks. Questions? Rachel, then.
Yeah, well, I was just going to kind of throw the ball back to you guys and ask, are there areas in which you feel you need further clarity or guidance?
Definitely coming up with some of those code provisions that we'll be talking about next week. I think that's going to be very helpful to see where we want to go in our next round of code updates. And I don't know, you guys think of any areas for clarity or guidance?
George, I have one.
Okay, well, just bear that in mind, and you can always feed it back to us later if something pops up.
Thanks.
Yeah, Greg, then Patty. Did you want to tack on to Rachel?
Well, it was an area I'd like them to look at. Can I jump in? You might.
Go right ahead.
Tiny homes.
We
need to. I think we need to be looking at tiny home provisions. I know there is an amendment to the International Residential Code specific to tiny homes, and I've talked with Glenwood Springs, and they didn't seem to think that they needed to even think about it. And I'd like us to be ahead of the curve on that. And maybe it's as simple as just adopting that, the International Tiny Home Code, into our code. I don't know. You knew I was going to bring that up, didn't you? Thank you.
Greg?
Just when you're mentioning the caucuses, I noticed the one that I didn't hear was Capitol and Snowmass Creek. I don't know if you have anything to tell us about them, or how things are going up there, if you have any. That was one. Second was just regarding efficiency. It sounds like what you're doing, your reorganization with We've Done This, is to help create a faster workflow, more efficient workflow. Is that correct?
Right.
I didn't hear you say it, but that's what it
Right.
sounds like.
That's it. We, I think, Greg, maybe even before you came on board in January, we had talked with the board about having faster turnaround times on our building permits, so that once something's submitted, by the time we get it out the door and applicants can start building their home, to try to make that more efficient. So Brian's going to give you some great specifics here in just a second, but relative to the capital snowmass groups, we have not heard a lot. The last update I got from the snowmass side was that they're working diligently and will bring us back something. And on the capital side, I'm really not sure where that is right now. So
they have a draft master plan that's circulating now, just as of like last week.
Great. So we'll follow up more on that.
One thought on the efficiency front, just to throw it in, since, I mean, we did introduce new staff, and Cindy mentioned that we're still looking for one position. We've just rehired another position, which means that we had a period this spring where we were down 4 positions. Right. And so I think it's really important to note that when Brian talks about, we're seeing these improvements in our building permit turnaround times, but we have some staff who've been working very, very, very hard to cover for those missing positions. And so I think huge kudos to Christy and Bonnie, our permit technicians, also to Joanna's not here, but Larissa, who helped cover that planning engineer position, which was vacant for about 3 months. So anyway, I think it's really important to note that we've been working from a diminished staff pool for a while, and things are looking great. They're looking up. We're really excited to have the new people we do, but there's been a lot going on with staff turnover while we were implementing a new permit process, and it's been challenging.
Right.
And
part of that too is working with BITS. Skylar Clay has been our dedicated BITS coordinator, and he has helped us so much with our electronic review process and getting that going, along with Bonnie, to coordinate that effort has been huge, and the changes that have been made have been really significant in the daily workflow. So we want to really thank BITS, and especially Skylar and John, for that help. And there's so many other people to thank. I don't think Tony Popish is here, and and Jan, I mean, they're working away. I think Jan's out in the field doing inspections, and so we really, really appreciate how hard and how much overtime they've actually put in to get us to the point that we are right now. And I think you'll be pleased with some of the reporting that Brian has. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
All right. And that's what I brought forward, was the exciting numbers, hopefully, or at least the ones that we kind of look at the most. Our goal was the 4 to 6 week turnaround time. And at the first 4 months of this year, we were doing a decent job of staying around that average. We were doing about actually 6 to 7 weeks. We've kind of slipped down to an 8-week turnaround on average right now, which is still tremendous for the learning curve of turning over this new digital process and the staffing shortages that we've had. We've had a couple of health issues and maternity leaves and vacation time coming through, and we've tried to keep that live-work balance within the department and not overwork and overtax, although people are still putting in extra hours and a lot of time put into this. But that is our average. 65% of all of the permits issued for the first up to from January 1 to current today have been under that 8-week threshold, closer to the 6 and under threshold.
And explain what that means. That's not just
that's part of the process too. Now, when we re-engineer the process, we broke in kind of 2 halves, where we don't even technically consider it a building permit till it meets the requirements of the pre-application round of review, which is the zoning and the engineering and the environmental health and some of those other referral departments. So it doesn't even become a true building permit until it meets that criteria. So we were speaking of 4 to 6 weeks once it became a building permit. We're looking at 8 weeks for the entire new process, which is pretty amazing because some of those permits would have maybe fallen through the cracks or had threshold items that would have stopped it from being able to even get to the building department. So now, when something actually gets to building, it's just sticks and bricks and basic code stuff, and it's not some of the local ordinances and the land use stuff and some of those other threshold items that we're really trying to deal with up front. And we even are looking to front load that even more and push some of that more into the planning side of things, so that when we revamp that half of the process, or that beginning portion of the process, that we can actually do some of that upfront work on that end of things. So, as I said, 65% of all of the permits that we've issued so far in 2017 have been under that 8-week threshold. So, change orders, we're averaging about 3 weeks on just a minor change order or a major change order. That's average on all types of change orders. Now, we have some on the anomaly side that are in that longer, anywhere from some 14 to some 20 weeks just on a change order. But those are significant change orders that had some back and forths and some interaction that would have actually happened in that pre-app round if it was a true building permit starting from scratch. So that overall average on change orders is 3 weeks. The overall average on building permits, additions and remodels is 8 weeks. So the other half of what I was going to bring forward was how we're doing on budget, and what we've collected thus far this year is about 44% of our total budget. So we're at mid-year, so we should be about 50%. So it sounds like we're a little behind the 8 ball, but when you look at that, that's $1.2 million. When you do the inventory of what's in-house just waiting to be reviewed, I've got a valuation inventory currently of $69 million worth of projects that have to be reviewed. So if we close the door today, didn't take anything else in, and just process those at the 2.7%, we would meet budget for 2017.
Yay.
So, very exciting.
So we're just going to close.
Yeah, we're not going to take any more. We've got 19 single families. That's plenty for this year.
Staff just lit up back there.
61 million of that 69 million is single family residences. The good news is on that, there's only one of the 11 that we have in-house that's over 10,000 square feet. It's a 14,000 square foot one, but the remainder of those 10 of that 11 are less than 10,000 square feet. But we're getting decent valuation numbers. We're scrutinizing that number like we set up a few years ago to audit that number when it comes through, and I'm doing a good job at the final of not letting that final building inspection be done till we do that second audit, which compares the original amount to the final amount. And we've collected thus far in this year, what was it?
Over 168.
168,000 additional money already collected. And I think the last few weeks I've collected a little bit more than that. So I think we're doing really well on that collections that we set up a few years back. So I think those overall are exciting numbers. That 69 million, when you multiply it by 2.7, like I said, is $1.8 million in permit fees translated. So with that 1.3 that we've already collected, we've hit the 3.2 that we were asked to hit.
So Brian, what sort of percentage of the of those building permits coming in as remodels versus new? Any idea? Rough
idea? Well, like I said, only 19 of those are single-family residents out of 149. So 130 of those are remodels, additions, change orders.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of new houses if it was all new starts.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I was curious. Okay,
I don't know if I dare ask this, but do you keep tracks of satisfaction index? Are the customers able to give feedback, and do you have metrics on how things are going on from their end? Do they feel like it's moving more quickly? It sounds like it's happening. I'm just wondering, what's the feedback from the community?
Okay. There's a reality to that some people are dissatisfied. There's some people, and part of that is we're not getting exactly what we need from them in the first place, and there's a dialogue back and forth, and there's a give and take, and their timelines have been prolonged, not entirely to our fault, but also there's a shared responsibility there.
Sure. It's
So
a stressful situation.
I think those people, if you probably interviewed them, would say that so far the system's broken. But we are getting a lot of positive feedback and a lot of encouragement, and I've had some of our more difficult customers come and praise our permit coordinators for the time they spent working with them to bring in the right information in the beginning, and the time that people have spent above and beyond to work through some of the issues that are out there. And we've had a lot of positive feedback. And we've done public outreach where we've sat in this room and asked, what do you think of the way we've re-engineered and the way we're going? And it's still in its infancy. I mean, we've got a whole team that does nothing but revamp this process as it grows, because we want to make sure that it's really making a difference and really doing what we set out to do. So it's a work in progress for sure, but we are already making headway in our turnaround times, which was the promise we made when we went after the budget numbers that we went after. And it was also I wanted to demonstrate to the contractors that they're going to get something for those additional fees that they were putting in. So we're trying everything we can to make sure that we stay on top of the ones. And we've had to reprioritize a few that kind of got hung up in bad situations or just kind of stalled out in the process, and tried to focus team time and effort to get certain things going on without shuffling the whole prioritization issue, because we don't want to ever get to where people think that they get bumped to the front of the line. So there's a balance there of keeping things flowing, helping the guys that got stuck, but not, jeopardizing the first in, first out, and the respect of somebody who came in queued up with everything proper and got stuck behind somebody who was messing up the system and bogging things down. So there's constant checkbacks and interaction to make sure that this process is flowing. So.
Right. Well, don't hesitate to share it when you get positive feedback, for certain. Make sure we all know this. I carry a recorder
in my pocket.
Plus, we haven't had phone calls. I haven't had phone calls. That's always a good sign.
That's a good sign.
Mm-hmm. Are you looking at doing any adjustments in terms of allowing when construction is going to be happening due to the Glenwood Bridge closure?
I actually have a situation where a guy is buying a modular and he has to get it across the bridge before this happens. So we actually kind of had to help him kind of get through the process a little quicker. But, so we have tried to make accommodations where they seem reasonable.
But I mean, in terms of changing hours, allowing construction to start earlier or to stay a little bit later, or any
We haven't really delved into that. We've talked about staff and trying to coordinate maybe an early start and a late start type situation for staff, and looking at kind of being creative around people's travel time. We've also asked if anybody has open property to put tents up.
But you haven't had any requests from contractors knowing that the problem they're going to see trying to get through Glenwood if they're coming from the west of Glenwood, subs or anything? No, all right.
Just to
Rachel?
follow up on George's point there, we've been, and you're probably aware of this, talking with the city of Aspen about better management of the Buttermilk parking lot and allowing longer-term rentals in part of it. And as that's finalized, I think that'd be great for your department to try to get out to contractors or your email list in case people can leave their work truck here and then be able to ride the bus across the bridge and things like that. And you'd probably have to check in with the city of Aspen, but it's my understanding that when the music students leave the Burlingame seasonal, they're going to try to make that available for workers, construction workers who'd like to stay up on this side of the bridge during the week.
I think they're offering that to city employees.
Yeah.
As a priority over anybody else.
Yeah, and I just don't know enough about it. That's why it'd be worth checking with the city, because if they do both Meroldt and the Burlingame seasonal, they'd have a lot of units that could certainly help with the impact. So, just try to find out the details on those before the August 12th.
August 14th.
Is it the eclipse day, and then the bridge closes and everything happens at once. So, okay, thanks a lot.
We had bad karma that day.
We definitely have staff on the other side of that, and there are a lot of contractors that come from that part of the world. So,
Great. Other questions or comments? Well, I know you guys are doing a tremendous amount of work, and besides your everyday work, we've got staff working on the energy code upgrades. We've got the draft climate action plan we saw today.
TDR.
So we appreciate all the hard work you're doing. And all these additional initiatives that we're asking you to do. So thank you.
You guys do a great job. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank
truly
you all.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And thanks for coming over, everybody. You can stay
I wish we
close
could have
for the
gotten
rest of the
everybody. It would've
afternoon
been
if you want.
That's a pretty good turnout. That's about as good as it gets.
Interesting thought. Okay, John, you have one?
Yeah,
other?
just one last follow-up. I wasn't quick enough to catch Charlotte's email, but CDOT has actually asked for a joint meeting on August 1st, so we'll try and get those agenda items on there.
And that would be their annual update or a meeting on something else?
Annual update.
Okay.
So
on
it's earlier
August
than
1st.
normal.
Yeah.
so
Maybe
we just-
because of the bridge.
It might be because of the bridge. It might be
They
because
don't want to
of
be
the
driving
bridge,
over for
actually.
the bridge. Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
I won't be
they've
here
got
that
some
day.
inside knowledge about how that's going to work. So
Yeah.
so anyway, I just thought I'd
Oh,
let you know
great.
since I had missed that follow-up.
All right, super,
Yeah.
thanks.
You know, I would note, I noticed yesterday, coming over Independence Pass, a significant, it seems significant number of the smaller trucks, the 28-foot, 32-foot.
Coming over?
Yeah, and that's fine, that's legal, but it really struck me that, I don't know if anybody's talked to a City Market or Cisco or any of those delivery companies, I don't know if we want to or not, to say, have you guys thought about leasing a smaller truck fleet for this 3-month period? Or for at least part of it while the pass is
They were
open?
trying to do something with using some of the parking lots at Walmart for transfer, but that puts them on this side of the bridge. So I
Yeah,
don't know how
yeah,
that's
so
gonna-
I was just thinking, you know, but it just,
It's
it
a
seemed
small
that you
parking
saw, and there's always been those smaller seafood delivery trucks and different trucks that are able to use Independence Pass, but I think that the wear and tear on the pass is going to be particularly noticeable on the Lake County side where you're really seeing a lot of subsidence. It's just getting worse and worse, and that would be something to talk to CDOT about. What are their longer-term plans to deal with the subsidence issues on the Lake County side? Because it would close us off, you know, in the summer if it were to fail, and it also would dramatically affect the Twin Lakes and Leadville's business and things like that as well. Okay.
All right, that's it. Thanks, Grassroots. We're back here tomorrow at noon.
Got it.
Thank you.
So-
For construction workers.
For my crown.
I've got to go.